Hey, what's
Yeah,
up, Logic?
I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, sometimes Kristen's live just kind of goes dead all of a sudden. But yeah, I'm trying to like actually rewrite the first two premises here into something that would be closer to modus ponens. But thanks for hosting. No pressure if you got to go. By the way, like
No,
if
I'm chilling, man. I really want to have this conversation. You know how it is for me. This is like what I want to talk about all the time. It's hard to find conversations that are like focused, you know?
yeah, for sure. So, and I've debated like the Cario a few times. Like he does get like sometimes quite technical and even I'd say on occasion pedantic. So I can
hmm
understand like Darth's frustration there.
Yeah, like it's like we're both on the same team trying to solve the problem rather than trying to get sort of a W or interpret like one of us has the solution, you know? It's a little bit of a different
Yeah,
approach to conversation.
and as Darth said, like we got to keep in mind. I think he is like 18 or 19, and
Yeah,
usually
I
I
know he's smart as fuck, man, if that's the case. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
no, he's definitely a smart guy. And usually I don't really reference people's age in general, but the point being that uh, we have to keep in mind that like emotional regulation sometimes um, does go along with age. So
For sure. No, for sure. I'm trying to like change my background here so that I don't have this weird thing going on. Um, um, okay, so in general, I'm confused how you can assert a valid syllogism at all without some sort of conditional. Like, aren't conditionals presupposed? Even if we don't put if and then, if we just assert P and assert Q, aren't they implied? Aren't those like conditionals basically implied?
implied in the sense of what do you mean? Like assuming that they are true or
Can we get to validity without the implication of some conditional? Like if we say it's raining outside, right? We don't need to provide a conditional up front, right? But when we get into validating the argument, when I'm going through my premise of the argument, even though I haven't really made an argument, I've just made a statement, right? It is raining outside. In order to validate that, we'd have to like back it up with some premises. And that's if I was just dogmatic about it raining outside, then thered be no way to like falsify my claim, making it invalid. The falsifiability seems to be the validity of the claim.
um, sure. I mean, let's say it's not falsifiable. Then in that case, you just wouldn't really be able to determine whether there's credibility in this case, like gradations of truth for the premise, right? Like if you say,
Exactly.
yeah, it's like raining on Europa, like the moon that one of Jupiter's moons, right? But you've got no way, let's say hypothetically, to like verify that. Then it's just like a premise that you're just going to assume. I mean, you could still have this is why you could have like a valid syllogism, but it wouldn't necessarily be sound, right? It's where people like differentiate between like valid and sound syllogisms. Like I could say, like all men are immortal. Socrates is a man. Conclusion:
Yes.
Socrates is immortal, right? Like
Okay.
that's valid, no problem there, but it's not sound, right?
Yes. And so what I want to talk about here is the objectivity of like okay wait when we talk about validity, we're talking about the structure of the argument itself. And that's not going to contain any references to definitions or semantics. The problem is we are hinging the premises on our semantics. These definitions term right regardless of whatever the term, if we're using the term rain or we're using good or bad, these terms come with baggage that we have to. It seems like the ability to check our premises has to do also with formalizing our definitions, like checking the definition of a term, even though a term doesn't have propositional content, right? It's implied that when we use a term, the definition is somewhat redefinable or questionable or up, or it's an assumption at least. Like we're highlighting our terms as baseline assumptions. So okay, the reason I'm putting this forward is that is there a way to escape, like when he puts forward a premise like all omnibenevolent, if God existed, right, if an omnibenevolent God existed, then no bad would exist. Well, the only way we can like check that premise is to get bogged down seemingly in the semantics of the words. Is there a way to check the validity without doing that? Yes, we can just check the bare structure, but that doesn't seem to get us anywhere. Like the reason modus ponens seems applicable is because of the conditional. It's implying a conditional. It's implying some sort of tentative nature to the statement. There's no way to formalize, like, am I just rambling here or am I making any sense? Like, is there a way to formalize an actual semantic statement in any way that's not like that, that isn't falsifiable? That doesn't make sense.
Is there a way to formalize a semantic statement? So, and anything that carries like some intelligibility is what I take that to mean.
Like another way of saying it would be, I know that definitions don't have propositional content, but they kind of seem to have that. That seems like a bit of a contradiction to me, because the conditional of validity seems to harness the variable terms. So yes, we need to assume the terms in order to make a valid statement, but the validity also requires us to be flexible, or at least define the limitations of our terms. That's what the falsifiability is. That's what validity is.
I mean, but that's where you get into a discussion about whether or not there's actually validity present, like whether the terms carry through the premises and into the conclusion, right? And based off of like one interpretation, for example, you might have an argument with multi-premise argument, exactly, where it wouldn't necessarily follow if you interpret the premises in one direction, but then it would follow if you have a different interpretation, right? Where you have like this symmetry between the premises that lead into, or symmetry between the conclusion and the premises.
Okay, so do you see why this is related to this problem that Darth is dealing with about like asserting he can go down, just like you said, the rabbit hole of syllogisms, reasserting a conclusion. And this is related to what we're kind of talking about, like how to escape that loop, I suppose, or like like the only way to do it would be to highlight the inference rule, basically. Like, and this problem with the fact that we can put multiple premises into P can represent multiple premises. So that's why I said, why can't his argument just be modus ponens? We could line up all his premises, right, and just call that P, and then call his conclusion C1 Q, and then just imply that if this is falsifiable, then of course the conditionals are implied. If P, then Q.
Yeah, I mean, again, if he restructures, like one way is right before the live ended, where he could restructure it and just kind of remove the two premises, and then use conclusion one as his first premise, right, and then 4 as his second premise, and then kind of get to his main conclusion. But you can also use modus tollens, right, which is kind of like
negation.
And here's one potential way. Like if you say, like let's say your first premise is if an omnibenevolent, omnipotent being existed, it would not allow bad things to exist, and then that would be your first premise. And then your second premise would simply be bad things do exist, right? So that would be like the not Q, right? So essentially, modus tollens is saying if P then Q, if not Q then not P, right?
Yep.
So here the second premise is not Q. So because the Q in the first premise was it would not allow bad things to exist, and then the second premise here would, to negate that, would be technically it would allow bad things to exist, but here's part of that ambiguity that you were talking about, right? Where I'm actually using a second premise that isn't saying it allows bad things to exist. I'm just saying bad things do exist, right? And then one could kind of quibble here and say, well, like, is that still valid? Because you're altering it slightly. But here's like, I guess we can have a little bit of like wiggle room and like license where we can equate certain things based off of like reasonability. So the question is like the statement allowing bad things to exist and simply bad things do exist um, equivalent in its logical force to get you to the conclusion that
Yes,
an
yes.
omnipotent being does not exist. To me, it seems fair, right? Although somebody could potentially quibble with that.
Well, see, that seems like another assertion of the conditional. This, I know that we didn't put any propositional content into this word bad or good. Nonetheless, when we get bogged down in the semantics, it demands this conditional that if I'm asserting bad in this way with this definition, then I can conclude these certain premises and conclusions. I can make these arguments. Like the conditional, I don't know if we can escape a conditional when it comes to the definitions of words like that. Like, because we're asserting, or define the word bad and good in a totally different, right, usage, and then use it to defend my argument.
Yeah, no doubt,
So,
right?
so that conditional though, okay, so the reason I'm driving this home is because the word if, what it means is it's leaping us into the land of hypotheticals. The word if is not a statement of truth.
Yeah, it's what might be called um, I think the term is like syncatagoramatic, which is
Okay.
essentially like a word that doesn't have any meaning by itself, but it only gains
Hmm.
meaning like in context or like around
Hmm.
other words.
It puts the other words into a context, I suppose, is one
Yeah,
way of saying it, right? Especially if it's the leading conditional, if it's the first symbol. I don't know, but
yeah.
I guess that's my point. Is like, it does can validity escape that assertion of hypotheticals? Seems like this hypothetical realm symbology is demands us this level of humility, at least, of falsifiability on our terms.
Uh, yes, but that's like where we get into like defense of the premises, right? Where somebody would just say like whatever the conditional is, like let's say you grant. Um, well, first of all, you have to go like in two steps. Like one, first, like defending the very conditional itself, like whether or not it makes sense. Like if I say if the sky is blue, then Pluto's going to explode. Like that. First of all, how do you even get to that connection, right? But assuming you can kind
Mm-hmm.
of formulate a connection there to make sense of it, then you'd have to also like provide some sort of defense for that if that's one of your premises, right?
Yes. So the person who's asserting this blue sky Pluto argument, the validity of their argument is not going to require some standardized like objective syllogism that proves their claim. It's going to rely on them to continuously be willing to basically falsify and run back through their terms. Everyone's going to be asking them, well, what do you mean by blue and what do you mean by Pluto? Right? And they're going to have to define these terms in a way that makes sense for their claim. And the more they're able to do that, right? If a physicist comes and asks them really particular questions about those claims, they're going to have to be able to defend them as in a rigorous way. That could all be done technically, right? They could just be using some crazy linguistic model that the usages of words are different than the colloquial usage. So the what I'm saying is there seems to be an aesthetic to the structure of validity that's objective, and it doesn't relate to any syntax, or sorry, semantics. It is the syntax. Doesn't relate to any semantics or context of the symbology itself. It's a way to structure symbology in a tentative way. Like, okay, whenever I say, this is another way of putting it out, I always say math is deductive. It's deductive. I've got a lot of pushback for that because there are inductive applications of math. If I were to theorize a equation for predicting an outcome of a certain algorithm, that would be inductive. But the methodology, right? The actual rules, the algebraic rules that dictate how to manipulate an equation are all deductive.
Yeah, I mean that doesn't sound off to me. I think you can have a variety of reasoning methods in any field, right? I mean, in day-to-day life, we use informal logic, which is just generally inductive, not deductive, right? And
Yes.
similarly with math, it just depends on like, what your method for reaching some conclusion is. I mean, I think
Well,
there's even
I'm
like,
talking about the strict principle, the strict rules of equation manipulation.
yeah. Yeah, so you start with like, your axioms, and then from there you apply rules of inference to deduce other rules, right, from those axioms.
Mm, the basic rules of equation manipulation themselves aren't inductive.
No, no,
For
I said
instance,
deductive. Deductive,
oh yes,
I'm saying.
that's
Yeah.
right. That is
Yeah.
right. That is right.
Hmm.
So we the symbology. So I think that structure, that aesthetic structure of validity, the deductive validity, doesn't really say much about the truth. Like we could go in circles about the omniscience of God, the powers of God, what is good and bad, right? But validity doesn't really have anything to say about these claims. Validity, in my opinion, it really embodies these claims. The essence that we are talking about when we're talking about the properties of God, the properties of truth, the properties of good and bad, it's interesting that these conversations rely on a syntactical structure. So it's almost like what is our claims? What does the soundness of our claims even matter? When we should when the, obviously the syntax is the thing embodying truth, goodness, and omnipotence, omniscience, all the omni properties seems to be embodied through the syntax, this method of humility. It's a method of questioning ourselves, not really one of stacking assumptions on to get to some sort of conclusion. Because this is the problem of the like syllogism loophole that you were talking about. We can just eventually we're going to have to make an inductive application of our syllogism.
Oh, you paused.
Otherwise, we just seem like we're circling around this loop of syllogistic reasoning that never grounds us. It never gets us to like the truth, right? It seems to frustrate us in that sense. But I think that is the ironically, that is the architecture or the aesthetic of validity. That's the syntax. It's not meant to make you comfortable. It's not meant to make you certain. It's meant to put you in a state of humility and um, questioning yourself.
I, no doubt, logic. As far as like the inner relationship between the terms, yeah, it's critical to better understand what you're actually saying as far as putting forward a syllogism, aside from just merely applying the inference rule and then seeing about defending the substance of the premises. So I agree with you. Like the syntax as far as like how these terms interrelate to one another is another avenue of exploration as far as like understanding meaning. But as far as getting into the defense of the premises, yeah, it's going to also depend on like your epistemic basis, right? Like if you're like a foundationalist or infinitist or perhaps a coherentist, because presumably you could keep offering an infinity if you're an infinitist of syllogisms to defend each premise, right? And that's just simply going to be absurd because we're not going to be able to do that. So we kind of have these axioms or inductive positions where eventually we kind of say like, look, this premise or this axiom seems reasonable enough, so we're just going to run with it, assume that it's true based off of like, X, Y, and Z that supports it, and then X, Y, and Z themselves might be, further brute facts that we can't necessarily back up beyond our intuitions or beyond some other foundation. And then from there, we just start applying the inference rules to get to the conclusions. And every now and then, we might come back and re-examine those axioms and determine and see if like there's some problem with them. And until that time, right, like we're just kind of stuck with it, because otherwise we just wouldn't really be able to produce arguments at that point if we don't have like some basis, some axiom from which we're working on.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like a reconsideration of those axioms are like really necessary before we move on to the context or the semantics of the argument. It seems like most people are confused about that syntax and about the meaning of the syntax and how it relates to the etiquette of conversation, and the practical applications of like emotional control, and empathizing with your opposition, those kinds of things. Seems hippy dippy, seems cliche and hippy dippy, yet it's actually the foundation of these conversations. Like, I don't understand how we could have a debate about God or about any important topic without some sort of recognition of the structure, the foundation of what are we using to argue validly.
100%. By the way, like, who let this guy up here take me out?
Me.
Yo, it's good.
I love debating. Take me out.
What's up, Take?
How you guys doing?
Good, man.
I'm doing all right, not too bad.
I always just want to talk to you about inflation, but we don't have to talk about that. That's all I remember you talking to me about, though.
Yeah, economics is based.
Yeah, we got into it about like what is inflation and whether or not you can measure it objectively. It's a really interesting topic. I go off on it all the time. It's a very interesting thing to try to measure and wrap your head around the value of the dollar.
That's my next.
What did Bart say about that?
We haven't talked about that too much. It's actually my next after I kind of get through my abortion arc and maybe do a little bit more of theism, atheism debates. I'm probably going to start doing economic debates. Capitalism, communism,
Really?
socialism, economic structures.
Dude.
Yeah, but that's like right now I'd probably, because I've studied these things like in conjunction with like political philosophy back in the day, but it's just been so long that if I like really jumped into the ring with somebody who's been at it for a while, I'd probably just kind of be out of my element.
Again, though, like these debates, like, oh, we could put the ideologies against each other, socialism versus capitalism, but I think the conversation is way more conducive to like just tackle a problem like what is inflation, those kinds of things, rather than trying to pinpoint each other's ideology. There's some practical problems that are kind of solvable that we can, regardless of your political stance, sort of look at. And inflation's a great one just because, well, A, so many people are apathetic about it, not really many people know about it, and then B, it's really empowering to redefine your own assumptions of the dollar, be able to revalue your own value system. It's like intrinsically directly connected to your own value system, thinking about what is money, what is inflation. Sometimes these other economic principles can get a little bit like out of touch with reality, whereas inflation's a really practical one.
And it's interesting to think about how not everything is affected by inflation the same way. Like a lot of things serve as a much better hedge against inflation. For example, real estate properties. As societies become very inflated, the properties of real estate tend to correlate with that as well. So the real property of these, the real value of these properties isn't affected negatively as much. So when you think about a society like we've had that's undergoing a lot of inflation, rich people that own a lot of property are going to be affected a lot less than a hardworking person who, now their basic needs and expenses have inflated so much.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone who's holding any other commodity other than the dollar is gonna win. You're the loser. You're the poor person if you hold dollars. Anyone who holds real estate or really in a hyperinflated economy, anything. If you hold anything other than the dollar, you're gonna end up more wealthy than the poor person who week to week struggles by and only gets to hold dollars, never actually gets any equity or assets. But there's this other problem related directly to real estate, which is that I think that if we had a more sound banking system, rich people wouldn't shelter their money in real estate. Real estate's a really good investment right now because it's a way to shelter your money from things like inflation.
For
And
sure.
yeah, and that's why we have a lot of neglected housing, like at half vacancy and things like that, because the owners aren't really, I mean, having a tenant in their property helps them pay the bills, but at the end of the day, the property is more of a speculative investment, real estate investment, right? Than it is a business. Although, yes, they're paying the bills with tenants, they're really safe housing their equity. They're trying to store their money somewhere, and real estate's one of the safest places. So if we had a better sound money system, I think you would see the incentives start to shift and housing markets start to open up because it might not be as stable of an investment opportunity as just simply putting your money in the bank and gaining a proper amount of interest or whatever. If you didn't have to take the risk on real estate, the headache with dealing with a tenant and property taxes and all that, and you could just put your money in a safe house, tax shelter or whatever, then that's what you would do, and that would open up the housing market. It would bring prices down, and we wouldn't have this low vacancy rate. Like in my city, in Vancouver, I'm pretty sure it's literally like 50-60% vacancy. I've been to some like top penthouse skyscraper, what you'd think is a $10,000 unit, and it's full of with a bunch of travelers who have neglected the space completely. They're all paying a few $100s to share rooms and stuff. You go up to this top penthouse of, the lobby's beautiful and all marble. You get up to the penthouse and it's absolutely neglected. The paint is falling off the walls, and there's literally 12 people living in like a 2-bedroom place, and that's the penthouse. It's interesting to see how this real estate tension, the housing crisis, how it's playing out. And I think it goes side by side with like the banking issues and inflation.
100%. And, I hear so many people say that real estate's a really good investment, but they don't consider that. I mean, it's not a full-fledged business, but it's like a part-time job. And you are expected to, for example, be in charge of making sure that your property is well maintained. So you have to have like a proclivity to be kind of a handyman. I mean, if you're someone who doesn't have these basic, you don't know how to repair a doorknob, you don't know how to do basic upkeep, you don't know how to paint the walls, you're not going to be operating your property optimally, and you're going to lose so much profit because of that.
Yeah, for sure. And you need at the drop of a hat to be able to do things like run keys or whatever could happen, right? The battery dies on the lock on the door. There's so many, just you need to be in the city, and at a drop of a hat, you need to be able to deal with an issue with a tenant.
100%.
That's a
Yeah.
business. That's a full-time job almost.
Yeah. And also
Can
a
we
lot
talk
of
about how Take Me Out's delusional?
in what way?
Read your comment again.
Somehow I
Well,
doubt that take me out.
well, I just, even if I am Chris's favorite, I don't think that
I'm only here for Bart. Quit playing with me.
I do think
Love
it's
you,
good
Chris.
to
Thank you.
protect his feelings. Um,
I'm not
Sure, take
protecting
me
his
out.
feelings. Quit playing.
wink, wink. So, yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Logic, you're a capitalist, right? Logic.
yeah, I think so. Free market capitalist, yeah.
Take me out, I think, is a capitalist too. I think he's like a diehard
Big.
capitalist, actually.
I'm a big capitalist, but I'm liberal, so I think you need good regulations and support equality for people, things like that.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not
there's a
a
balance.
so-called anarcho-capitalist. I think regulated, managed capitalism seems more equitable to maximize
I love
the benefits.
communism.
Are you
Do
really,
you,
Chris?
you
I think
do,
you're just
Chris,
saying that.
don't you? You do.
Chris is getting bars.
Yo, I was
Couldn't hear
thinking
y'all.
about
Sorry,
that.
I lost signal.
Okay, have you guys ever heard of the Whatever podcast?
Yeah.
Earlier?
It's pretty interesting. Andrew Wilson's one of the common guests they have on, like kind of co-host. He's got a really interesting view on all of this, which I don't know if I agree with, but he's definitely shed the light for me on things like initially I thought private property and like bodily autonomy are really important values to me, but now he's pressing that on me basically, with a lot of his ideas, saying that like force doctrine, right? Any force doctrine relies on a patriarchy, which is a crazy claim, but when you think about it, it almost does make sense. It's like you need force doctrine to enforce any regulation, right? Literally a monopoly on violence. If you do not have that, then the society isn't, like, the enforcement isn't real. You know, you can't rely on like just purely technology. You actually have to have brute force enforcing these regulations, which basically enshrines a patriarchy, which then he goes on to say is like, yeah, a statement about bodily autonomy, because like really none of us own our own bodies and we're all partaking in this like societal ownership. These are all new ideas to me. Like I'm just kind of considering them, but it's kind of hard to argue against.
Well, I tend to agree if, excuse me, if this were more of the distant past, right, where like force distribution was more concentrated in brute physicality, right? But nowadays you can have one person with their finger on a button who's more powerful than the entirety of the world combined, right? So I'm less convinced that it has to be patriarchal in nature, right? Because as you know, you've probably heard the famous statement, you know, God made them, Colt made them equal, or something like that, right? With the popularization of firearms and other weaponry, we have this force distribution that's not reliant anymore on you know, the physical differences, the physical averages between the schmexes.
Yeah, I guess he makes me somewhat skeptical of that. Like even, I don't know, like even like any kind of weapon seems to have some sort of advantage to a male versus a female. If they both wield the same weapon, it seems like there is still this dynamic of like physicality, especially with enforcement.
Sure, I'll grant that, but the main point I was making is that, like, you know, not everybody in society is going to have access to that weaponry, right? Like, you know, we're going to reserve
Right.
certain types of weapons for the government. Like the government is usually going to have access to technology and offense and defenses that the average citizen, whether it's male or female, is just going to be completely devoid of.
Yes.
Right. So I agree with you. Like, you know, you could probably point to some statistical discrepancy as far as the operation of weaponry between men and women, you know, even though those can probably be debated as well. I mean, Chris is over here. I think she just went through, well, I don't want to say, you know, anything that she doesn't want to reveal herself. But the point being,
No doubt, no doubt. It's a general statement. It's not about there's outliers, but like for instance,
Right.
if women tomorrow wanted to overthrow men, I don't know if it'd be possible. Whereas the other way around, I think would be.
It would be possible because women can weaponize sex. That's why they make better assassins.
That's a good argument. That's actually a pretty good argument. That's the one thing I've considered as well, like emotional manipulation. But at the end of the day, I just don't know if that's enough.
I mean, I
I don't
know,
know if
like,
that's enough.
Just ask the CIA.
take me out would fall for that. I definitely wouldn't, though. Like, I think I'd stick to my guns.
I
You sure
do
about that
think
part?
I do think if Chris tried to weaponize sex with me, for instance, that other men might be left kind of on the sidelines, less fortunate,
Yeah,
in theory.
I'm not sure it would really pan
Theoretically
out that
speaking,
way,
of
though.
course.
I think it would just be used as a means to an end to,
Let's
take
think
you
about
out.
it. Think about it this way.
I can
Prison-
promise you, take me out, it would not pan out in your favor.
Think about it this way: a prison system run by all female guards, or a prison system run by all male guards. Let's just assume the prisoners are the worst of the worst, female and male, worst of the worst, absolute degenerates who, the moment they get a chance, they will unalive you. I think that the all female guards wouldn't stand a chance.
They don't stand a chance. But in a prison system, too, female guards weaponize sex with the inmates. That's how
Yeah.
inmates get female
Yeah.
guards pregnant.
Yeah.
Again, it also depends for me what weaponry the female guards would have, right? That
Yeah,
would
let's
allow
assume
them.
they just have everything. Both
lever.
have all
Level.
the technology.
Yeah.
The prison is top notch tech. All the ammunition and everything you need, it's all top notch for both. I would still think that, for instance, the risk of a prisoner getting a hold of a weapon, right, from a female guard versus a male guard, just that risk alone.
Yeah, that probably would be, all else being equal, heightened, given
Yeah.
the physical discrepancies, the average physical discrepancies. And the other part would be like, how the prison is designed, right? Like to maybe minimize some sort of this sort of occurrence. But for
Yeah.
me, again, even if you like grant all this, right? You have this like, structure that's built up that is composed of both men and women, and that's the structure of government. So the idea that it has to be patriarchal in the sense that like men have to predominate, given that we're no longer tied to the physical differences that underlie the schmexes, I just don't find it convincing. I don't find that it has to be fundamentally
Yeah.
patriarchal, because you have so much access to different applications of force technologically, that this to me would seem to kind of like override the necessity for a patriarchal foundation. But I see the argument, right, that the whatever podcast dude is, or the Wilson guy is making. It's just not something that
It's an interesting argument.
yeah, for sure.
I'm
I
changing
agree with you.
boxes, Logic. I don't like this box.
Okay, come whatever one you want.
See it take me out. He's taken off.
Yeah, he pieced out. If you want to go back to the syllogism thing, bro, do whatever you want. I'm gonna pick your brain on it though. Like, I'm interested to know why as skeptics, I think I'm a bit of a skeptic. Why do we want to put these arguments of God and truth and good and bad into some sort of syllogism? Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to put it into a syllogism? Is there like, do you want to convince yourself of these things being true or not true? Is there an element of, or are you just interested in the syntax and sort of formalizing arguments in general?
So the main idea, right, when you're formalizing something, is to kind of take away the ambiguity of natural language, right?
Yes,
Like when you and I are discussing things, we're usually using natural language, and there's probably a lot of ambiguity in what we're saying. We're not necessarily coming to any strict conclusions. We're not even necessarily coming to conclusions that are, clearly universalizable in any sense. So like when we formalize it, given that the proposition itself of classical theism appears to be a claim of universalizability, right? Where like this is something that simply exists, not in this context or this context, but just like in any context, because it's like a necessary truth or whatever the case may be. So the idea there obviously is to kind of like isolate and refine the claim, and to test that isolation and see how sensible it is, how reasonable it is. So I think that's the main idea, right, behind this formalization process of like putting it into a syllogism and then, testing the premises. I mean, again, like a very simple one would be, I think I already mentioned it, like you can take Darth's like five statement syllogism and just condense it into like if an omnibenevolent, omnipotent being existed, bad things would not exist. Bad things do exist. Therefore, an omnibenevolent being does not exist. I mean, it's like, a very basic modus tollens
Yes.
argument.
Yes. You just made me realize, though, I think what I'm trying to say. I think the applications of validity practically apply better to evaluating a person than they do the claims themselves. I don't think putting it into a syllogism or checking the validity of a particular claim gets us anywhere, because I think what validity and syntax is really doing is giving us a tool for measuring the reasonability of the person in front of us, not their claims. We could sit all day at an armchair and deductively go through claims without anyone in front of us ever. And we could run ourselves into insanity with the assertions we make and how certain we are about them. Nonetheless, I don't think validity applies in that way. I think the true application of it in the practical, everyday, real sense is to apply it to a person's reasonability, not their claims.
What I think it can be both, right? I mean, you can evaluate the
Well,
claim and then probably also then maybe make some sort of conclusion about the sensibility of the person, depending on
yes.
a variety of different factors, like how receptive they are to the criticism, how humble
Yes.
they are to that criticism, et cetera, right?
But what's the point of taking their claims away from them and going to the armchair and deductively sorting through them syllogistically?
We're not going against people. Like, we're not going into a church and saying, like, look, I'm going to give you this syllogism that's going to explain why you shouldn't be here, right? Like, this is like a public forum where, like, people are coming to this ground and exchanging these ideas. So I think,
Yes.
like, in this forum, it's like, free reign. I don't think there's
Yes.
any issue with it here. But I certainly agree with you if you're implying that, like, if somebody's like, going to actively deconstruct and challenge somebody else's belief on their own turf, on their own ground, I think that's like, potentially overstepping, right? Because we don't want to be like, harassed when we're engaging in our communities.
Yeah, we want to
Right.
do an inner critique. We want to leap into their worldview and critique from inside. We don't want to oppress or like other them. We want to, right, engage or entertain, right, humor their ideas.
Yeah, no doubt, especially in this context here where it's known that you're going to have arguments, debates, and particularly on those lives that are oriented in such a way where even if you haven't been on that panel before, you might be able to deduce or induce, right, that this is likely to occur. And if you don't want to engage in that, then just find some other activity. What do you think, Chris? Chris is away.
Sorry, I just got done running.
No, you're
Yeah, I
good.
just got done running. I'm at the dog park now. Hold on. Sorry, I had to catch my breath for a few minutes.
No,
Good job.
take your time. Yeah, W for you for running. I got to go to the gym. It's been like probably a week since I've been to the gym.
Yeah, it's a fucking 100 degrees outside too.
Good old
job.
Bama. Good old Bama. I've probably got to drop in a second.
Yeah, no
Thank
worries,
you,
man.
Logic, for having me on. I appreciate it. Chris, I will
course.
talk to you soon. I'll probably, if you stream later on, I'll probably be on your live or something.
I got a dispute with a ticket for texting and driving coming up, Bart. You got to help me construct an argument for that dispute process. This is the first time I ever disputed a ticket. You think I got a chance? Probably not. He had a chest cam on and everything. I was right on my phone, but I was stopped at a red light. I wasn't moving. But the
Were
ticket,
you?
dude, the ticket here is like $600, bro.
Jeez. Okay, you were in a car, or what was going on?
Yeah, I was in a car doing deliveries.
Yeah.
And typically, if you have that little like mount on your dashboard or on your rearview mirror, you can put your phone on that mount and they won't pull you over. I don't have one of those mounts. I drive a standard and I just kind of like had it So I had my hand on my shifter as well as the phone, and he was on a motorcycle, popped his head in my window, had the chest cam on, pulled me over, and yeah, gave me the drive. I was stopped at a red light though.
Okay. How did he tell you he had the chest cam on?
Yeah.
I mean, but you don't know for sure if it was recording. You just said that,
Nope.
right?
No,
Yeah.
and I also immediately asked him about the chest cam I was hoping was on. I asked him, hey, in the future, if I had a rear view mirror mount for my phone, would that have helped me? And he said, no, not really. If you're still paying attention to it in any way or like touching it, you could still get pulled over.
Right.
So I kind of want to just make a reasonability argument where I'm just, I'm not trying to argue against the law or give myself any sort of privileges. By the way, no pressure to stay if you need to go.
No, I can stay for a minute or two. Yeah, I mean, you have the ticket, and it probably identifies the infraction, the traffic
It does.
statute that
Yeah.
he claims you violated, right?
Distracted driving, I think, is what it is.
Yeah. Send me the. I mean, I don't know if you want to like. Well, you already said you're in Vancouver, so you're not going to be doxing yourself. Yeah, but like if you have
I don't care.
like the
I don't care if you know me, bro. I trust you.
W
Not afraid.
logic. Yeah. No. It's just like I don't want to ask you to reveal something you're not comfortable revealing, but you've already mentioned you're in Vancouver. But if you
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
send me the actual like infraction text, like what the
Okay.
statute says, like look up whatever infraction it's noted on the ticket, right, and then see what the actual text is of that infraction, and then I don't know how it works necessarily in Canada, right? But here in the US, if you get a ticket, yeah, you can show up and then like, kind of force the officer to show up as well to testify about what happened. And oftentimes they might
That's
not
what's
show
going to
up.
happen. They might not come.
Yeah.
But if they do, I will have to make my argument.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to be prepared just in case. But yeah, like if you can send me the info, but generally I presume that it's going to say something like, if it appears that you're distracted or if you're like looking away from the road on a phone or something, then you're like guilty or liable for that violation. And then the officer is going to say, right, that like, okay, well, yeah, I saw him and he was like, looking at his phone and not at the road. So was this your vehicle was stopped at the red light? Like it wasn't moving?
Yep, fully stopped. I was the
Okay.
first one at the light. I wasn't behind any car. There were no cars behind me. I was literally the only one at the intersection. He pulled up beside me on a motorcycle and kind of dipped his head in while I was semi looking down. I'm gonna say something along the lines of like I don't see myself as like privileged or trying to get out of any rules. I understand the safety issues with texting and driving, and I really pride myself on my driving record. I've never had a single blemish on my driving record. This would be the first thing that takes a demerit point off.
Yeah.
I take it really seriously driving safely. The only issue I have with a law like this is that, and I don't know if that's even the right language to say right away, but like the issue I have with a law like this is that it's kind of up to the discernment of the police officer how safely I'm driving. And at the end of the day, that's really up to me how safely I'm driving. Like if I'm driving my motor vehicle over the speed limit or through a stop sign and there's no enforcement around, it's my responsibility as the driver. And I have to say that like months now after I've got this ticket, I still deal with this problem of how to navigate my phone and driving. I'm not trying to break rules. I'm genuinely trying to drive safely, but at the same time, it's 2024 and my phone, I'm driving all day doing deliveries. I need to look at the map. I need to respond to text messages. I can't always pull over. And so I don't know. I think there's just this element of reasonability where it's like, do you really expect anyone? I mean, these days people have laptops and screens right on their dashboard. For me, I don't know how guilty how unsafely am I really driving by being stopped at a red light, basically, and looking at my phone quickly to check the time or whatever.
Yeah.
I suppose, right. It's like, it's not as if I'm speeding through a stop sign or a school zone, texting carelessly. There's an element here of discernment, but maybe that doesn't really much matter if I'm caught red-handed.
Well, it matters if it's depending on what like the verbiage of the statute actually is, right?
Right.
So I don't know what it says exactly, but obviously the first thing that comes to mind is like, look, Are you implying that if you're stopped at a red light, you can't like, quickly look at your phone and like, tap something like that? That just seems kind of absurd, right? So,
Okay, that does seem absurd. I agree that seems absurd, but I mean,
yeah,
if the
so
law says that, like that's the law, I suppose. But and if it is the law, do I still have that room to kind of say like my
yeah,
opinion on the absurdness of it? Okay,
yeah,
interesting.
you absolutely do, because like a lot of
Cool.
times, like, there's going to be discretion. The court's going to apply its discretion as far as like enforceability. And even if it does enforce it, it will potentially apply its discretion in the penalty. So maybe,
And how will my, etiquette play a part in that? Like if I'm humble and I admit all these things I sort of said there and I go with good intention, will that matter versus me sort of being a defensive and rude, those kinds of things?
yeah, I mean, of course. I mean,
Okay.
that's going to matter everywhere, right? I mean,
Right.
kill them with kindness, so to speak.
Yes. Yes.
So naturally, it's going to, all else being equal, make you your arguments more receptive. Like if you're just coming in and kind of being a loud mouth, or somebody who's just seems unreasonable and not open to any criticism. So yeah, to me, like the first thing that comes to mind is like, look, you telling me like you're stopped at a stoplight, you can't like reach over and like adjust the radio knob, or like type
Yeah.
press something or tap something on your phone. So again, like that seems to be like the immediate argument that I would make, and I would say like, look, there's no question of safety here. Like I was clearly
Yeah.
stopped at a red light, and I was just looking down momentarily, and he happened to like poke his head in at that exact moment. Like this was just like literally like 1 to 2 seconds of me looking down,
Awesome,
probably
man.
even
Yes.
less. Yeah, so this would be like
Awesome.
again, assuming that like there's not some, I mean, again, doesn't even matter like if the statute like is like written in the most damning way against you. Like this still seems like a reasonable argument, but
Sick.
I think it would be kind of strange to have a statute that like implies that like you're gonna have to be at a red light, and literally you can't just change the freaking radio.
Yeah, like
you know
that is the literal description of it. But I
yeah,
mean, and in a lot of cases, my radio is kind of glitchy. That's less safe than my phone. I know my phone checking the time or something, I can do it right away. If I play around on my radio while driving like 80 on the highway, that's actually real dangerous, kind of. That's like even more dangerous than my phone, I'd say.
sure, yeah, I mean, also you're stopped at a red light and you want to like reach over into the glove box or open up the center console and grab something,
Yeah, or
right?
sip a coffee or have a donut or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
yeah. What
so
I
I don't
was
see.
doing was checking the map, and I told him that too. I was like, I was looking at the map. That's why I asked the question about the rear view mirror, because I'm doing deliveries. I need to know the address. I can't memorize the exact direction of every single address I'm going to. At some point in the drive, I'm going to have to look at and possibly touch the map, zoom in, zoom out. Kind of, I can pull over if it's an extended amount of things I need to do on the phone, but mostly it is kind of just a double check, zoom in, zoom out kind of thing on the map. Like,
Oh, dude, 100%. Like again, like I did stuff like that during law school. Like I did some like just to kind of have more means available. Like so I did some deliveries and
like
stuff.
what? What do you mean by that? You experimenting with these arguments? You mean
No, no,
during
no,
law
no.
school?
I was doing like
Oh,
rideshare stuff
deliveries,
and
deliveries.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
I see what you're saying. I see.
yeah, yeah. So I know exactly what you mean, because I was on my phone just check as I was going. Even when I was not at a red light, I was like always checking to see I was going the right way, and like even like adjusting the GPS, which is just very common. And you might have less of an argument there if you're moving, but if you're at a red light and stopped, and obviously the chance for any collision at that point is far minimized relative to driving,
Yeah, and
then I think you'd have a better argument there to say like, look, that's just like completely reasonable for me to check my phone for 1 second, or check the radio, or check the glove box for a second or something.
Yeah, that's kind of where I would also divert to like my driving record. Like obviously there are people on the road that I see daily texting and driving unsafely. This is not to excuse, the trend of texting and driving. I'm not trying to make that argument. I
Yep.
know my responsibilities and my driving record speaks for itself. The fact that I do this job every day and I take it really seriously and I haven't been pulled over more and I haven't been in an accident or even a fender bender shows that like I actually do take it. My risk management is something I take of utmost priority. And so yeah, that's like I think I don't know if that would hold up too, but that is kind of a testament to it. It's like I take my driving record really seriously. This isn't a joke, and this blemish means a lot to me. Like, to lose demerit points, it's made me a little bit paranoid. I don't know if that's what you're saying too. It's made me a little bit overly paranoid. Like, now when I'm driving, I'm overly uncomfortable in doing my job because I feel like I can't even look down at my phone for a second, basically. You know?
Sorry, 1 second. Logic.
No, don't be, dude. And if you have to go, I appreciate the conversation, bro. You're a G. You've given me some confidence here. I'm a little nervous going into court and stuff, but like you said, he might not even show up.
Yeah, so there's definitely a possibility that the officer won't show up, and again, I think this point would probably be, aside from me reviewing the case file or reviewing the rather ticket and the statute, like this would be the point that comes up immediately as far as like the reasonability of the action. The paranoid part, I think you could add that for sure. I mean, it would be like an adjunct to that argument, and then like say like, look, this like overall, because it seems so unreasonable, is now like made me even like more paranoid about like how I'm going about my livelihood. And again, this is my livelihood, and something that is completely understandable in that context, right? Like you can also add on like I especially waited, right, for the red light because I knew it would be safer.
Okay, I will. Yes, yes.
And then I thought I was like, just doing everything reasonable and expected of me as a motorist. And then like to get this ticket just seemed like completely irrational. And I think, I don't think the officer had any ill intent, but I just think he misunderstood what was going on. So something along those lines, I think, will be if you get assuming you get a good judge, it should be quite, at least to me, seems quite availing, right? Or would be quite availing. And then
I wonder if it's worth adding like the reduction amount. Like they offer a thing here in Canada. They're like, oh, if you go in, you're probably going to get a reduction. Like there's a good chance you'll get a reduction, but yes, the $600 is a big fine for me, and a reduction would be amazing. But really, the thing that hurts me the most is the demerit points. Like I want a clean, unblemished record, right? If this were to happen 2 more times, like literally, if this were to happen 2 more times, bro, I would get my license taken away.
Yeah,
like,
that's
after 20 plus years of drive, after 20 plus years of driving without a single accident, paying my insurance all the time, never had a single problem, like for that to happen is like, I guess not 20 plus, 15 plus years of driving. Like that's really I don't know, unreasonable.
Yeah, and here in the U.S. we do have like traffic school that like allows you to kind of like remove demerit points or points against your license so that they don't harm you. Worst case scenario, let's say this sticks, you get a reduction, but then like you can ask the court to see if you can do some sort of like traffic school, which is usually online.
Okay,
so you don't have to necessarily,
I'll ask them. Is there a program I can do to get rid of the demerit point? Okay, sick.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's like another avenue. So don't like despair, even if like it goes against you. Worst case scenario, I imagine there's going to be like availability for you to kind of avoid getting that demerit point.
Sick, man. Thank you for all the insight, bro. I'm not stressed on it. I just know you're a really good resource to talk to about this kind of thing.
My pleasure. Yeah, and feel free. Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I got low bars. Didn't mean to overtalk you. But yeah, feel free to send me the exact wording of that statute, and if I have any other suggestions, I'll definitely get back to you.
Man, thank you so much. No pressure on that. I know you're probably a busy guy. Yeah, no pressure. I will send you it. But again, no pressure to respond or anything. You're a G, bro.
Oh, no, for sure. Yeah. No, nowadays, again, like Chris knows, like I only have one case going on. Actually, I'm not that busy. I probably should be busier, but yeah, anyways, Chris, I don't have a girlfriend, but I am going to go get my coffee. Anyways, great talking to you, Logic. And
You too,
I
man.
will be back later on. Peace. Thanks for having me on.
Gang. Peace, bro. EJ, what up, though?
Oh shit, my mic went down. I was gonna ask Bart if he was a lawyer.
Yeah, he is.
I always thought he was a pilot. I don't know why.
No, he's a lawyer, I think. He is.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, I was curious in what state. I know, like in North Carolina, they have this thing. They have these two things that what is it? A speeding ticket that y'all
Oh,
are talking about?
I'm not. Oh, yeah, I got a texting and driving ticket.
Oh, texting while
Yeah.
driving ticket.
Yeah, but I was stopped at a red light, and like a motorcycle cop just kind of pulled up beside me and like saw me looking at my phone quick and gave me the ticket. I wasn't like I was stopped at a red light, but still.
Is that a motor violation ticket?
Yeah, I'm in Canada. I'm in Canada, but yeah, it's called distracted driving.
No, yeah, I know that, but I mean, like, for instance, like here in the States, like a seatbelt ticket, you can get a ticket for not wearing your seatbelt, but it doesn't put points on your license because it's not considered a.
Right, right. Yeah, this technically is part of the Motor Vehicle Act. Motor Vehicle Act, and yeah, it does take demerit points off.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know much about cell phone stuff because I ain't never, but I know like speeding. I mean, I would imagine speeding's worse than talking on your cell phone, and I know in in the state that I live in, they have these things, they call them preferred judgments. And you might be able to use a preferred judgment when it comes to talking on your cell phone or whatnot.
Okay, what's that?
So and right now I live in North Carolina, and the way it works is you got two things you can use when it comes to speeding. You can use your preferred judgment, or you can use a 10 miles an hour reduction. And each one of those things you can only use one every 3 years. So, like, let's say you use your preferred judgment, you can't use it again until 3 years later. But if you already use your preferred judgment, then you can use your 10 miles an hour reduction. And
Okay.
most of the time, preferred judgment means like it's like it's like a plea deal where you're not really guilty.
Using discernment, trying to use their discernment on the context of the situation, kind of thing.
Yeah, you don't get punished for it. It's like it's like a one get out of jail free card, sort of like type thing. And like even in criminal cases, they have that as well. Like if you do a criminal case, you also get what's that called? I think it's a different word. I don't think they use preferred judgment for it. It's like a first offenders program.
Right,
Like
right. Like forgiveness, first offender forgiveness kind of thing.
yeah. So if you've never had any like thing, and most of the time when it comes to a traffic violation, like the first offenders program, you can only use one time, right? And you can't really use it again. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I appreciate all that insight. My only concern is that I think that this policy is a bit of an attempt to crack down on texting and driving. They might be using me as a bit of an example. Like I don't know if they, they'll sympathize much because their whole approach might be, no, we've had so many accidents in this city from idiots texting and driving like you that basically, we want to hit you with this ticket so you learn your lesson. And we don't think anyone should ever look at their phone while driving. I could hear them kind of saying that, but
yeah,
but
I mean, texting while driving, like the number one cause of deaths and things like that is speeding. So texting and driving,
totally.
you're so even if they were trying to make an example of you, I don't think they would be in the higher scale of what causes the most problems when it comes to like speeding and DUIs and things like that.
Yeah, like I could have been drunk, speeding, and on my phone, But yeah, exactly. Like I'm stopped at a red light and I look at my phone quick.
Well, what I'm saying is like
look at the difference in impairment between looking at your phone and drunk driving. Whereas it's like drunk driving is much more impairing than looking at your phone, and it's just that looking at your phone is so much easier to do and get away with it, right? As opposed to like drunk driving where if you're caught, you're getting a DUI, which is a pretty terrible thing for your record.
Yeah,
but even But what I was going to say, like even DUIs and things like that, they also have that first thing too, right? Like
Yeah,
most
like
of the time
they're
you
even
don't.
forgiven. Yeah.
Yeah, they're even forgiving when it comes to things like that with your first time. I mean, I don't think people have to like. I knew this one lady who she got busted like three or four times, and they had to, those breathalyzer things, right?
Yeah.
Well, she had it installed in her car, and she actually had, in order for her to crank her car, she had to blow into it.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen a couple people with that, yeah. Which is crazy talking about forgiveness. Like, yeah, giving an alcoholic just blow in this tube and then you can drive. Like that is crazy forgiving. Like, damn, you've been
Dude,
caught how many times and we're still gonna let you drive.
talk about lack of impulse control though on the lady.
Yeah, man.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, that's like I said, lack of like that's the thing that trips me out about our system and stuff like that. It's like, oh, we care about you, but we know this has caused like 20 billion deaths every like 5 years or something. But like, it's okay, But we still care about you.
Well, I mean, in a sense, you do want to care about him still, like, right? Because the people who are doing this, like, if you drink like a little bit, right, and go driving, do you think you should be like punished for that if you don't get into a wreck? And so it's like,
Right.
there is a line there. Like, I think drunk driving is one of the most irresponsible things you can do. But there is kind of a line there where, like,
Oh, for sure,
how
man. Like when
exactly,
it was first passed, it was a huge controversy because like farmers out on the farm having a beer driving their tractor home are pissed they can't do that. It's a whole different lifestyle than driving on the highway, real drunk from the bar. That's a different outcome than like if you go out into rural areas, drinking and driving is pretty, normal. And it's not because it's not like wasted driving. It's because they're out on some back road and they've been digging in the ditch all day and they're having a beer on the way home in their truck. It's a lot different, than there's like you're saying, there's a lot of gray area there. Risk management in general, right? Giving someone a car in general is the risky thing. Like trusting anyone with this machine, death machine, is a crazy like trust in society that they give anyone, really.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, in the state of North Carolina, like we have a saying, and when it comes to deer, it's not a question of if you'll hit a deer; it's a question of when you'll hit a deer. And and it's probably different things in different parts of each state and whatnot. When you get these elements of things that can happen that's out of your control. And it's not the question of if they'll happen, it's a question of when they'll happen. Now, I can understand a lot of people would be like, well, I can be intoxicated and drive. Yeah, but I mean, everything is based off of things that aren't our control when it comes to defensive driving. And the problem with that is you want to be at the top of your game in that one, I think.
yeah, if you're drinking, you're actively impairing your ability to drive, which, given the nature of, like, it is a deadly weapon. So
Yeah,
misusing
yeah.
a deadly weapon, you don't have an excuse for that. And if your excuse is, well, I was impaired, then like you shouldn't have gotten impaired and then done that thing.
Yeah, it is
I,
interesting how they do let for the small amount of alcohol, right? Yeah, whatever. I think it's 0.09% or whatever.
I thought it was like
There's
point,
this,
0.5% or something.
right. Yeah, yeah.
well,
Like
here,
that percent is allowed, which is interesting.
well, I'll tell you something weird. I have my CDLs. And so, like in this out here, I would say in the United States, the average is 0.08. If you blow anything under 0.08.
Right.
However, if you have your CDLs, um, and it don't matter if you're working or not working, you can only blow a 0.04 or you'll lose your license.
No way. It takes it down a notch.
Takes it
No
down like
way.
50%. Yeah, so we cannot go out.
Hang
Anybody
on,
with a
what's a
CDL,
CDL?
like the transfer trucks,
It's like
things like.
another class of driver's license
Oh, basically, it's like if you have it's a heavier duty weapon, basically.
license.
So you
Yeah,
have to
Yeah,
yeah,
have
yeah.
it's
more
a
strict,
60,000
exactly.
pound
Yeah.
weapon. Yeah,
Right. So
basically.
it's like that You should have more guardrails in place for
but
somebody like it's like the equivalent of a handgun versus like an RPG or something.
Yeah, totally, but it is crazy that even in his like Honda Civic, if he gets pulled over with that license, he'll still reap the consequences of it. That's crazy, but it makes sense. You're
Yeah.
kinda, but yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah,
That is
so
kind of
like,
crazy that if you're not driving one that requires one, you still get the.
Right. It's like
yeah,
a big
I think it's a dumb
responsibility.
law personally, because I mean, what is it? 2 beers, you're over .08. Like you'll probably be over .04 in like 1 beer, you know. So you're
Yeah,
kind of
you.
like,
It's about half. I think it's like 0.5% approximately. It depends on the blood alcohol content and your size.
Now, interestingly, I do deliveries majority of the time downtown on my bike. So my level of risk management is basically my own, and I will do intoxicated sometimes, like, but I'm on a bike, so I'm putting myself at risk, which is I don't wear a helmet either. I don't have brakes on my bike either, but at the same time, it's interesting the risk management component of it because I feel like you're saying about defensive driving, there's just an approach to driving, which is from a risk management standpoint where you can, mitigate risks or drive defensively. Where if you don't have that practice or you don't have that education, like you're so vulnerable, even when you aren't intoxicated, you're just like disoriented with navigating through space.
Now hold
yeah,
up, real quick.
but
We
I
got to
think
talk about the. I'm fine with you riding a bike when you're intoxicated, but you should really be wearing a helmet and you should really have brakes if you're gonna do that.
I know everyone says that. There's a
Yeah,
lot.
For real though,
Yeah.
like what's the cost in wearing a helmet?
I've never
see,
worn
that's
one. Never worn one. There's not
Right,
really
but
a cost.
it increases your. It's like not wearing a seatbelt,
Yeah. There's an element
except it's
of,
even.
there's
Yeah.
an element of like false security. I know this is a bad argument, but this is only one I got for you. So I've witnessed people pad themselves up and then hurt themselves because of a false sense of security. I feel like the paranoia involved with not wearing a helmet, I'm not desensitized to it. It's a constant reminder of how careful I need to be. Again, I recognize the shortcomings of that argument because it's not always my fault. It could be just someone else that hits me. And in that case, I will wish that I was, I guess, protecting my head. But yeah, there's just this other element of where I'm not only riding through the streets, I'm also hopping on rails and doing tricks. And so if there's any level of uncomfortability, I don't do it. And the helmet is a weird added, from my own experience, sense of like false sense of security. But I recognize again the shortcomings of that argument.
shit. You ever seen the movie Rad? You ever seen that
Oh, of
movie?
course,
Yeah, bro.
OG BMX.
Yeah, man. See, I rode BMX back when that movie aired, man, and like I don't think none of us wore helmets, and we did some crazy shit, man. Like,
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
that,
and here's the thing: is if you are okay, like if your risk tolerance is okay with that, that's your right to do. Um, we take our own
Thanks,
risks.
man.
Some
Thanks,
people
man.
smoke. Yeah, dude, of course. I mean, e- as long as long as people are informed about the risks, they should be, allowed to do as they wish. People do dangerous
Thanks,
shit
man.
all
The
fucking time.
seatbelt's an interesting one though because like then you're putting other people at harm. Like if you have a passenger and you don't wear a seatbelt, there's been videos of people like their body shotgunning all over the car and harming the other person because they weren't wearing a seatbelt. So I kind
that's
of,
rare.
but that yeah, and sometimes lives are saved because of not wearing a seatbelt. It works the other way too. Like they could get ejected from the vehicle and that's what saves their life.
Yeah. Well, unless
But
you're Sam
that's also
Kinison.
rare. Because
Sam
usually, if you're
Kinison.
getting ejected, you're gonna hit your head and like get completely unalive just immediately.
Oh yeah.
But I think capitalism plays well. I would say insurance companies and the court systems plays a big role in that too, because that could be a good argument. Because I remember when I lived in Vegas, Vegas don't have an alcohol like law, right? So you could go to Walmart, any place, and buy liquor at like 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. There's no law there for it. And I always thought it was odd. I used to talk to people about it because I didn't see that many drunk driving accidents in Vegas. And like where I live at, they got this 2 a.m. law where you can't, all the clubs close at 2 a.m. The last call is 2 a.m.
Canada's
Everything closed.
11, bro. Canada's 11.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's really
Crazy.
early. But the really weird thing about that is, so like in Vegas, what if you can cut yourself off and they won't close the bar or nothing. They'll just give you food to like sober up and stuff like that. They don't kick you out. You know what I mean? Where like here it's like they cut you off, they kick you out, and then you have to go out. And that's just like a systematic thing, possibly.
Well,
When
I
it
think
comes
most
to like.
bars, like it depends what kind of bar you're going to, where there's going to be like those divey bars that are like, yeah, okay, get out now that you're not drinking anymore. But there's definitely, like not even really where I'm from, but like the Midwest especially, bars have kind of like a social purpose. And so you'll have, I mean, they're like a third space basically, just like churches. So a lot of bars, like you could cut yourself off, and I think they'd be pretty okay with that. But yeah, you're definitely right about there are some that nah.
No, but I mean, like in Vegas, like it was 24 hours, so they were open 24. You know what I mean? Where these clubs and a lot of these bars, they like close their business. They make everybody leave at a certain time, and they cut everybody off. And I always thought that was like, you know, like they should have like a lot of these places should probably like stop serving alcohol at a certain time and allow the people to sober, but still stay open. Probably allow them to sober up and then leave. And a lot of these cops, like they know the law, right? So they know like these clubs are shutting down and like bars and stuff is shutting down at a certain time, and everybody's gonna leave at that time. So like they're gonna try and catch people,
Well, yeah,
leaving.
it's like going to a river at the, spawning season, right? It's like they're gonna all the drunks are gonna be coming out at this time, so I better set up my net and get ready to catch some drunks, so I can pay the city ordinance.
Exactly. It's the same way with speed traps. Like I've gotten a speeding ticket one time. Like I was in California, and it was a big hill, like a mountain, right? I didn't even put he was at the bottom of the mountain behind a tree, and his motorcycle was like on the side of something. He wasn't even like next to his motorcycle. He was like behind a tree with a fucking speed gun. And I'm thinking to myself, why are you at the bottom of this mountain? I'm gonna build up speed. You know what I mean? Going down the hill. It's not that
Well, yeah,
I'm
that's the whole
actually.
point. They want to get you. They want to get you for as much as they can.
Exactly. It's nickel and
It's
diamond.
kind
That's all it's
yeah,
about.
it's kind of a grim incentive.
When I got this texting ticket, the guy didn't even ask for my insurance. He had the ticket so fast, fastest interaction I've had with a cop ever, dude. Asked for my license, goes back, gives me the ticket. It was like not even 5 minutes, and he was out, just filling quotas.
Another thing, like what was that? It was a documentary I seen, and they were talking about how like y'all remember that? There used to be a TV show called 21 Jump Street, right? Y'all remember
Yeah, I've
that?
seen it.
Well, they did that in California, right? They did the same thing. They had like undercover cops go to like a high school and stuff, and there was this autistic kid, and he had like real bad autism or whatnot, and he didn't have no friends, right? And so he buddied up. He thought he was his friend, but he was really like an undercover cop. And the cop was like, "Well, I can't be your friend because I need drugs, right? I need some pot or something like that." So the autistic kid's like, "Well, if I don't get him, he was saying he needs it for whatever reason. He just thought that his friend needed the drug, right? So the autistic kid like hangs out um, at a dispensary and just gets like some homeless guy to go in and get him some weed because like in California weed's legal as long as you got a driver's license, or at this time you had to have like a medical card or whatnot. And so he goes out, gives him the weed. Then the kid goes and gives the undercover cop who he thinks is his friend weed, and then he gets arrested. And then so like the parents like ended up getting a lawyer and they got a PI and stuff like that. And then they ended up suing the state, right? Saying because they made a claim that the state were bigger drug dealers than the actual drug dealers, because it's like they actually got the kid to get the drugs for him because the kid didn't know anything about weed or anything like that. He just wanted his friend to be all right, And I mean, try proving that, I mean, that's
No, like
the
entrapment. So like the police are not allowed to set you up in
well,
the
they didn't.
sense of like, well, that's the thing. He like he is the one who got the guy to get the. It wasn't like he was trying to sell to this guy. The guy. So it's like you as the government can't go get the person to do something they wouldn't normally do and then punish them for it because the only inciting incident was the guy asking him, right?
Yeah, but see, the thing about it was the thing that came out during the lawsuit was the fact that they learned that the police force, right, the state police force, they get grants from the federal government, and their grants is like they get a certain amount of grants based upon drugs, like their money that they get from the federal government. It has to do with the amount of busts they do for like drugs and different types of offenses and stuff like that. And that was what they were saying in the lawsuit was the fact that uh, who's the bigger drug dealer? You know what I mean? In this sense, because the cops are getting paid for making these like any type of bust. And let's see that's the whole reason a lot of people don't want to answer questions when it comes to police, because
You
like
shouldn't. You
yeah
shouldn't. The honestly, the only words out of your mouth should be, "I'd like to see a lawyer," or
yeah
"I'd like to
because
see my lawyer."
yeah because like it'd be hard to prove what's entrapment, you know what I mean, because the
The
cops
only
have
thing, the only thing that's going to happen if you open your mouths and talk to the police without a lawyer is they're going to get more evidence on you. In no way will it help you.
But I mean, knowing that, it wouldn't surprise me if, like, the reason they try and nickel and dime people and stuff like that is the fact that they get grants from the federal government based upon, a certain amount of things, like certain types of tickets and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, a lot of the time
Regardless of
it'll
what.
be like a city, like will be reliant on like speeding tickets. So a jurisdiction will be short on funding, and so they will build up quotas, I imagine, to meet that shortfall in spending. Also, real quick, just random sidetrack is what are your guys' spiciest takes on just anything? The spiciest
I
take
have a
you have
lot.
that's like, I don't think I don't think they'll agree with this.
Just in general of anything, any topic. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go first. I don't think there should be borders. We would be better off without borders or states.
That's your spiciest one. When do you get a lot of pushback trying to say that to people?
Yeah, I do. A lot of people
Yeah.
disagree with that.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure they do. 100.
Well, see, I think, I agree with that because, like, I mean, even
Hang on
in the
though.
United States.
Give me your spiciest take first, and then we'll discuss.
My spiciest take? Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
dude, it gets spicy. My spiciest take. All right. So I would say my ideology when it comes to my belief, right, is very philosophical than it is blind faith, right? So I believe that uh, there's how can I say it? Uh, you ever seen Attack of the Body Snatchers or Frailty
No.
or
No.
no, it's not Frailty, Faculty, like Body Snatchers, Faculty, uh, or even just like you ever seen Meet the Parents?
Yeah.
Is this like a doppelganger thing?
Yes, like a doppelganger thing, right?
Right, like Us. Have you seen Us? That's an incredibly that's a good movie. I haven't seen the other ones. I know the
No.
like I've heard of them though.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen Us, but the whole doppelganger thing like freaks me out, right? Especially because I read a lot, right? I don't know if y'all know read many Brandon Sanderson's books or whatnot. But like there was the Mistborn series, had me thinking about it because they got these things called oh gosh, what do they call them? Well, anyways, they're these like creatures that if they get your bones, they can mimic you, right? They can mimic like everything that you do and stuff like that, right? And so like I think that when it comes to my belief system, I really believe that that goes with the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? Because in the Old Testament, it says like honor your father and your mother, for your days will be longer on this earth. But then the New Testament is like, I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? So it's like the only way to prove anything about life is to follow in the footsteps of a certain not really ideology, but like in the way that someone carried themselves uh, based upon actions, like meritocracy, right? So like if that person was the way, the truth, and the life, he was the way, the truth, and the life based upon merits that he did, right? Whereas though the honor your parents and mother has no meritocracy like associated with it, and who's to say that they're not a doppelganger and rather than your parents? I guess.
That's wild. Okay, well, I want to hear Logic's spiciest take, or just
Yeah,
a spicy take.
that's crazy, dude. Mine is probably just that logic is a tool for spirituality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on,
I
lost
think
the
both of
audio.
yours
I don't know if y'all can hear me.
both
or
of
not.
yours
I
were
can hear
pretty
you.
wild. Um, I can't say I agree with it. Um, but I think it's interesting. I'm interested to hear more about why you think what you do. But where do you guys want to start?
We can start with yours, man. Wherever you guys want to start. The doppelganger
Any
thing is crazy. I don't know if I fully get it.
I'm not sure I fully get it yet either. So, are you saying basically like like the New Testament was a doppelganger of the Old Testament?
Yeah, I don't know how you wrap the Bible into that too.
I'm also interested in why you think logic is a tool for spirituality.
Um, it seems like everyone in any conversation, whenever we're having like a tense disagreement, the conversation often goes to like, what is logic? Like, what is truth? Is there objective truth? Is there subjective truth? It seems like there's this pattern in discussion and communication. And when it hits rock bottom, I think that the tools we have for reasonability and rationality are ultimately tools to like communicate and empathize with our opposition rather than prove something is like certain or true.
Well,
Sorry
I
about
feel
that.
like there's. Oh, all good.
I was gonna say sorry about that. I lost
Er,
audio or something. I think I
just
got
to
a phone.
finish, I think there's two different aspects to that. In one of them, like when we're having conversations, there are multiple purposes, and some of that is reaching a common understanding or empathizing or under just getting another person, like listening to what they are saying and responding in kind. And then there's ones where you are out to with an objective. That could be to educate somebody. It could be to beat somebody, in an argument or something. Get a certain condition, get them to agree to something. And I think a lot of these TikTok debates are really, really focused on the second one and like winning versus these people they disagree with. And while that's understandable to want to do. I think it ultimately is self-defeating, because I don't think you're going to be convincing people if you start on the foot of you're wrong and let me tell you why.
Okay, I want to link this to your idea about borders, if we can.
Oh, please.
Yeah, do you see a parallel or an analogy between borders and strict definitions?
Well, kind of. The problem is borders, in the way I mean them, is geographical separation
Yeah.
between humans into states.
Yes, yeah.
But
Okay. Let's use that definition.
definitions, though,
Let's use
it's
that
weird because, like,
definition.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, I would just say that, like, with words, similarly, we're defining boundaries and borders to the terms.
I'd
I
say
know
the
they're not on land masses. They're not geographical, like you said.
Oh no, but I can totally map this to, a spirit, not a spiritual, basically a knowledge or information base. So the problem I see with this is actually, well, there's a few like misalignments. One of them is that geography takes place in the three-dimensional realm, where there's a limited amount of space, and so there will, like, we can all recognize the exact same borders. And we mostly do. There are some disagreements, but generally it's de facto whoever has control of the land. With thoughts, there is no right definition. It's simply everybody's differing takes on what it is. And so it's almost like everyone does have a definition of a word, unless they haven't learned it. But it's always going to be a little bit different in understanding. And so it's a little hard to put those two together, but I think I see where you're coming from.
Well,
I
the
think
reason I try to draw the parallel though is just because a person who says there needs to be borders sounds a lot like a person who says there needs to be dogmatic definitions of words, in the sense that they're not willing to see the arbitrary nature of the both borders and words.
I would agree with you, except I've seen a lot of leftists also be really dogmatic about terms. Like, not to disparage one side or the other, like I
Oh, for
personally am
sure.
a
For
leftist.
sure.
But
Similar to
I've
borders.
seen,
Similar
yeah.
to borders.
But the thing is, they'll be leftists, so they'll be free borders for the most part. Not all leftists are, but then they will be very dogmatic about definitions, like things like communism, right? Where, and it's like, I get being dogmatic about it, some things, especially when people use definitions to like disparage their opponent, is pretty like they'll try to define their opponent for them, which I think is really toxic.
Definition of irrational. Yeah.
Yeah. You should honestly just say, how do you define yourself? And then let them say it, rather than like make assumptions based on what you hear they are. Like, if I hear somebody's a Christian, it doesn't affect my opinion of the person because I have no idea what that means to them. It's only going to be when they start talking about what it means that I'm going to form an opinion about them.
Well, it's like I agree with you. I think borders borders kind of like are sort of like a predestined thing of ideology, but I think they're there for a reason. It's like, all right, like the Bible Belt. Everybody, if you say the Bible Belt, everybody automatically assumes southern East Coast United States, right? But what a lot of people don't know is it wasn't that way until after the Civil War, until after Southern Reconstruction and stuff like that. So it was like a border that was created by an outside entity rather than a border that was created within itself. Like, it didn't create itself to make its own border. It was created by something. And
I
therefore
think
it's kind of like putting somebody in a box, you know what I mean?
I think really the Confederate States
of America built that boundary between South and North. Because even now, I think we still see the same exact lines in the East of the Civil War, give or take a couple, because there were border states, right? So like Kentucky, Tennessee, I think Missouri, where they were on the verge of declaring for either, and I think they all ultimately sided with the Union because the Union got there more faster and more effectively, but. There
Yeah,
were a lot of people in them who were fighting for the South.
but the Bible
These
Belt
borders are arbitrary. Yeah. Go ahead.
the Bible Belt was like historically speaking, it was northern states due to the Puritans landing and stuff like that. It wasn't southern states. The Puritans were the Bible Belt people. It wasn't until after the Civil War did it move to the southern states, which is, I mean, it's just a weird thing, a lot of people don't know.
And it's funny because you were talking about that, and it's like the Midwest is still part of, like, if we're talking about religiosity, the Midwest is still part of the Bible Belt. It is simply a political line if people are like, oh, it's the South. Yeah, it's arbitrary. It's kind of like how if you look at the breakdown of each state, they like to paint it as blue and red states, but the population is pretty evenly split. It's like it'll be like 45-55, 60-40 would be a pretty extreme one, like California. But most of them are pretty even, and most of the ones that are close are like going to be 50-50 almost.
So much I could
Yeah, but
say, but you go ahead, EJ. You go ahead.
But technically, I mean, but that's the confusion even when you get to like history and stuff like that when it comes to like borders and stuff. Like if you were going to take like the Louisiana, I mean,
Oh, why I got a phone call.
Yeah, I think so. If you didn't get a phone call, we lost you another way, EJ.
All right, Louisiana Purchase, EJ.
Um, if I were to talk to a Christian, right, about their beliefs, it would be similar to the way I would judge the health of a border. A border, ideally, people can come and go with ease. It is relatively open. It isn't tyrannical, right? It's more of a window of opportunity than it is a wall of separation. But in war-torn borders, you see the exact opposite. And so, similar to how we confront each other, whether it's combative or empathetic in a discussion, regardless of the context of the discussion. See, a border will have to be set up regardless of the beliefs or the contentions with the different cultures or clashes of politics, in a way that it will have to be set up in a way that is rational. Our judgment of someone and their claims to Christianity is at least hinged on rationality. They could be absolutely outrageous with their assertions, but as long as they're willing to falsify and work through their assertions, then they're reasonable. And in the same way, a border, right, can be reasonable or unreasonable. And I think that like the way spirituality plays a role in these things is by utilizing a structure that is regardless of the context, right, of the border. Like, let's say, for instance, this will demonstrate it perfectly. Drawing a detailed map of a border is quite difficult because we can get into the minutiae of each little detail, each city, street,
If
each
you hang on, if you want an
coastline.
even better example, look at a coastline. Coastlines are the
Yes,
best
a
example.
border.
Just
Exactly.
they're
Yes.
tens of thousands of miles of long for like it's infinite basically.
and it's high real estate too.
And so
It's actually not
detailed, right?
infinite, but
If we
well,
were
I
to
think
try
it
to
might
draw a
be.
map of it, we would have errors in the map, right? We could only get so detailed on the coastline, or we could generalize about the coastline and zoom way out. But the structure of zooming is not, that is the rational process. This ability to zoom in and out, regardless of the
the context. And that is a spiritual thing. I think that ability to change perspectives and zoom in and out and have lots of relative perspectives or angles on a particular content, like an argument or a border, right? Gives you both the strategic vantage point in something like war and in something like politics, the ability to articulate and defend and empathize with your opposition in a political manner.
I feel like the word for this would be mindfulness.
Let me, Fanson, how do you pronounce it? Is it Fanson? Fanson?
Yeah, Fansom or Patrick is fine.
All right. Do you think that Borders itself plays a role in divide and conquer in some regard?
By divide and conquer, do you mean like the concept of splitting your enemies up into small groups and, conquering them one at a time? Or what do you mean by that?
Like instead of like divide and conquer, whereas if you had multiple, I guess, individual entities, war, like not really.
I
not
see
really,
what you're saying. Hang on, actually 100% get what you're saying, and it does, and it actually has a lot to to tie this back into logic. What logic was saying as well. We do it over not just geographical land, but we also do it over social groups. So if you look at something like racism, which is simply bigotry over perceived racial differences, it is completely divisionary. It just divides people against each other based on race. And that makes them more susceptible to control and manipulation by outside forces. So these things that we are letting control us, whether somebody is intentionally causing it in us or we are simply allowing our base instinct to get out and not be mindful of our behavior and how it's affecting others.
Yes.
We're weakening ourselves by dividing ourselves rather than staying united.
Okay. I want to take this conversation one step further and say the difference, why it's not mindfulness to me, why I'm using this term spirituality, is because there's a particular link between boundary dissolution and rationality. Boundary dissolution itself is a mindfulness is this aspect for me of recognizing patterns, and it's almost like formalizing boundaries. It's recognizing the boundaries. Boundary dissolution requires a level of spirituality because it requires doubting what you are sensing. It requires literally doubting what you believe, doubting what you hold to be true, questioning yourself. Mindfulness.
So I would argue mindfulness is more like your awareness of your behaviors and beliefs. When you have mindfulness, it basically gives you more control over what you are doing and believing. Whereas when you have low mindfulness,
that control is hinged on, for me, some form of boundary dissolution.
So explain boundary dissolution to me.
Well, you're talking about it too with borders and words. This ability to
removing borders.
Sure.
Okay.
Because that's and questioning a term too, right? Like if I come up to a tribe that doesn't speak any dialect that I do, we have to reasonably come to terms. We have to, even though we have no vocabulary to talk to each other, we could, I guess, just fight, or the only way to communicate is to somehow come to some terms. And that's a boundary dissolution process, because I have to, when he goes ooga booga, I have to go, no, knuckle luck. And he goes ooga looga, right? And I have to question now, wait, what do I even mean by knuckle luck? Like he's forming a whole new word now, I guess, that I have to just go along with, even though I don't fully know the meaning. It's this spiritual process. Or I could be frustrated by that process and just continue dogmatically saying knuckle luck, and then fight them.
Or well, in American standards, I would say there's a lot of words that have changed its meanings, like the words that we thought were that even the words that we use, that they have been changed throughout, and I would say society's standpoint, to where uh, we don't even know the real meaning of certain words really anymore, due to the changing of their representation of it, right?
Yet etymology is an interesting study. Like the root history of the words themselves often do have etymology to them. You can trace back the root to its, Greek lineage, the English word, or it's you're right, like it's different lineages and from different languages. You're right that the meaning, the modern meaning, the postmodern meaning, somewhat is elusive to us, but it almost as though it requires some etymology. When we trace back a word's history, we can see its meaning more clearly because, oh, look, the root of this word derives from this word. Like, philosophy it derives from a word of love of wisdom,
Yeah, exactly.
philosophia, right?
Exactly. I mean, people. I tell you, the biggest word I feel like people misuse constantly is capitalism as a whole. Because
Hmm.
capitalism, I'll tell you why. Because
I'll do you
capitalism.
one better. I'll do you one better. Socialism.
Well, yeah.
In
I
the
mean,
United States, anyway. Yeah, go ahead.
but capitalism is not a term that represents. See, any, like, even China can have capitalism. Any place can have capitalism. The difference would be the rules around thus capitalism. It's just a way of making money, right? And like, people can make, you can have many different things surrounding capitalism, many different rules, but that doesn't make it what the country is. You understand what I'm saying? Like, like, there's
It's a
many different.
spectrum.
Yeah, it's a spectrum, exactly.
Yeah, the
No,
And
I
distinction.
100% disagree. Or, sorry, not disagree. Sorry, I 100% agree with that. It's a
Yeah,
spectrum.
but
the distinction I'd make is this word with isms. Like any ism is an absolute. So true communism, capitalism has never been realized. There are certain capitalist policies and communist policies that have been implemented in certain, right, military
Right.
regimes, or but to use the ism is, I think, the confusing part. When people
Dude,
speak of it as an ism, it's like, well, now you're using the language a little bit too total.
well,
that is
I've
the most
noticed.
frustrating part about like listening to like a communist and like somebody else talk and they're like, What about Stalin?" And it's like, dude, you realize communism doesn't just mean every communist country that has existed, right? It's a Go ahead,
Right.
Wyatt, sorry.
Right, and same with capitalism. Like none of these terms have been fully realized. Of course, there's no there. That would be a totalitarian regime, right? Which has never like existed in on those terms front like that.
Well, in history, I've noticed that, like, even when people understand what one meaning is and they have an understanding of it, a lot of times what happens is they change the meaning to something different, and then somebody else takes that meaning that does something different, right? Like, to understand what I know about history is to when it comes to capitalism and stuff like that. The last, I would say, when it came to, when it came to the three laws and capitalism together, it would, you would have to. Henry Ford was, like, I would say, a true capitalist, because what he did helped multiple people, right? He invented something. He didn't invent it. He just created it. He just changed it with a bunch of parts that made jobs for multiple people. But the problem with that was you had a lot of other people around that time, like Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, things like that. And what Henry Ford did.
We lost him again.
Popular guy, I guess. I want you to know, Logic. I'd rather be in this tiny 3-person live, with 0 viewers than any 50-person live, debate.
Oh man,
Just
thank
period.
you. I feel the same
I
way. It's way more relaxed.
I enjoy
I'm sorry, I got
conversations.
a phone call. Well, I was
Please
all I was gonna say
continue.
was what I was gonna say was Henry Ford, his what he did, which I would consider true capitalism, got turned into welfare capitalism. And then these other people like JP Morgan stuff, then they became capitalists, which is the essence of modern day capitalism, which I would probably say is extreme capitalism.
Well, I
Rather
would
than
say Henry Ford was a capitalist, and he did do a lot of exploiting, but he was very effective, and he enacted effective policies for his business. So, like, giving his workers enough pay, so and like so that they could buy his products, and treating them well, and having a standard assembly line for these things so he could produce them really cheaply, and reducing the number of options so he could mass produce them more effectively. Like, he'd made a lot of very smart innovations. And so that's why he was so effective. But he was definitely like, I don't know, I don't have any strong feelings about Henry Ford. Some people do both ways. Um, but I know he was a bit of both.
Yeah, I'm not talking
And
about him. I'm not talking about him as a person. I'm talking about, his business ethics and his business sense and
Well,
how he did it. Because like even the what he did, making the car more affordable, it also did a lot of amazing things when it came to micromanagement. Like I don't know, are y'all familiar with the Greens book? Are y'all familiar with that?
no.
The Greens book is how can I say this? I'm gonna try to be try to be good about it because like I don't want to insult anybody, and some people don't know my heart and stuff like that. But the Green book,
Classic.
yeah, dude, classic Wyatt.
Hey Jay, you're gone again. I'm gonna say really quickly, my thoughts are that I don't want to judge the person more than the system that allowed this person to emerge, whether it be Henry Ford or another entrepreneur or another dictator from another country. What interests me is that why capitalism or the capitalist system seems interesting to me is because the incentives seem to be boundary dissolving and cooperative so that people like Henry Ford can both micro and macro
Well,
manage
hang
through.
on.
all right, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
I would
All right.
disagree, and I don't mean to interrupt, but it isn't boundary dissolving. It's actually boundary creating, because it starts to create a divide between rich and poor. Just under capitalism, because of the way free systems work, the more powerful entity will build up power over time because they can destroy the weak and take their resources.
Okay, but
And
let's look at it
and
from the Henry Ford, the situation where he's incentivized to cooperate with many millions of people. It's a
yeah, but he made
cooperative structure,
himself, he made himself a millionaire in the process. Like, it
along
wasn't
with
through
lots of others.
altruism.
Yeah,
Along
but
with lots of others.
he made lots of pig. That's what I was going to say. The Greens book was the African
Well, who else
American
did he
pop.
make a millionaire?
Well, I mean, I was going to talk about the Greens book when it came to micro managing stuff, and what the Greens book was so the car became affordable, and your average working person could be able to get a car, and African Americans ended up moving out of the area that like during certain times in history they moved out and moved towards west and things like that. But the problem was they didn't have a place they could stop at or whatnot because the Jim Crow laws and stuff like that was still a problem even in parts that weren't even the South. There were Southern apologetics and things like that all throughout the country. Well, the Greens book was a thing where you had white business owners that didn't agree with they didn't have any segregation in their businesses, and you had black business owners that weren't in the South and the Greens Book sort of like made these businesses available to black communities that were moving out of there or just traveling in general, that were accepting, that were more accepting to things that weren't, I would say, the social norm, I guess, in certain parts of the country, and it helped their business. It not only helped out certain people doing what they were doing, it also helped out businesses in many ways. So I mean, this is a micromanaging thing, and which I can understand why, why that would be a cutthroat thing
So,
in some regards.
EJ, would I would argue though that allowing businesses to segregate, like not allow a certain group of people based on their skin color, which would be capitalistic, laissez-faire, let people manage as they will, don't intervene, is bad. We should have intervened a long time ago, and as soon as it started happening, and gone, yeah, you're not allowed to bar people from entering based on your skin color. That would be a more
I get that.
socialistic
I get
policy.
that. But what I'm trying to point out is, without the car, you wouldn't have had, or just transportation in general. I would say petro transportation. You wouldn't have had
Well,
that mass.
not just petro. I mean, any type of transportation. Before the car, you had the rail. Railroad was incredibly important for connecting cities. You
No,
have boats.
I'm not so sure that preventing people, saying to people you can do what you want with your property is like problematic as a problem that's endemic to capitalism. Saying that, I mean, like, let's not forget that Jim Crow, the reason why we had segregationist policies in the South was precisely because the government enforced those segregationist policies. It wasn't a direct byproduct of capitalism. People were institutionally racist, and the government reinforced those social structures. It wasn't.
I would argue that's not really socialistic, since the people who were making the decisions were not the people. Like, I agree with you. That was there were government failings that allowed it to happen, and oftentimes governments do step in and are the ones instituting these laws.
Not socialistic. I'm just saying it's not an inherent problem of capitalism that people will do things that we consider disadvantageous with their property. That's a problem of political freedom.
Totally. And basically, I believe when I say socialist, part of that entails maximum democratization of the political system, because I think that when you remove power from powerful actors and you allow everybody to have an equal playing field and equal vote, you are enabling individual actors and disabling actors which have gotten a larger advantage in society, thus giving them more power over the political process. So, I mean, and that's honestly a lot of my contention with a lot of the communist movements that have happened in the world, is they have been largely authoritarian, and I'm anti-authoritarian.
What I was saying, I'm sorry, y'all. I keep getting phone calls when I'm talking. This is whack. But the thing I was talking about, the migration and stuff like that, had to do with not so much, because we did have trains and stuff like that. People could move, out west. But when I talk about mass migration and stuff like that, even if you took a train and you got to your destination, you wouldn't have no place to sleep. You wouldn't have no shelter.
Hang on. No, that's not true. So you would take a train station to a city, and then everything would be within walking distance of the train station.
I hear what you're saying, but the thing about it is, I mean, the average person that didn't know nobody in some place, they wouldn't have knowledge of where to go. You
No,
understand what I'm
but
saying?
there would
It's
be
not.
places nearby. You could ask locals. You often had people you knew in other cities that you were visiting. Like, that's why you would be going there. So, like, there were hotels, right? Like, businesses
No,
existed to serve these needs.
Yeah, but I mean, depending on where you're at, if you could actually go to these hotels, if you were a certain person of color. But regardless, if you had a vehicle,
Hold on.
you at least had
Hang
a.
on. We're talking about before the car, so, like, probably pre-bellum, in which case they wouldn't be traveling anyway because they were mostly enslaved in the South.
Well, I mean, they could get. I mean, I'm pretty sure they could. Oh, I don't know
There
if they could
were
get
there were in the North, but why would they like, I imagine there would be some segregation, but it wasn't as wide scale as it would later become. But I don't know historically what the facts of that are, so I would hesitate to make a affirmative claim there.
What was the point? What was the point you were trying to make, Wyatt? Because I know about the Green Book. So obviously, a lot of black people in the United States were incentivized to purchase their own automobiles precisely because the segregation on public transport was despicable. And as a consequence of that, what's his name? Hugo Green, the guy who made the motorist guidebook for colored people, where places they could stay that they weren't going to be necessarily harassed by either black-owned businesses or businesses that had accommodations for colored people. But what was the point you were trying to make?
I was talking about the Greens book. That's what I was talking about earlier. That was the whole point of the conversation, was the Greens book, based upon what Henry Ford did in a micromanaging, true capitalist sense of. But I mean, what he did was considered welfare capitalism, not like true capitalism, due to the times.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure. I've never heard that term before. But I just consider that. I consider the fact that black people were better off as a consequence of having easier access to automobiles, kind of just a positive externality of the fact that Henry Ford was self-interested in revolutionizing the automobile industry to line his own pockets.
Yes, that's why it's interesting to me, though. That's why it's interesting that those incentives still line up. It's like a mutually beneficial incentive system, it seems like.
What Adam Smith
You
wrote
want to
about
let Mel up?
Well, I think the difference between Henry Ford wanting to do his pockets is not so much him wanting to become rich; it's how he did it, right? It's how he did it based upon how, like, J.P. Morgan and the other people did it. Henry Ford did not do it well, like, I'm gonna stab this person in the back and take his company. You know what I mean? Henry Ford
Right,
said,
but he totally did that. Dude, if you're a millionaire at that time, you have blood on your hands, regardless of like almost anything else.
well, what Henry Ford did, Henry Ford made jobs and
Yeah,
factories and
hang
businesses for,
on,
like, multiple
EJ,
people.
So what I'm saying though is he had effective business practices. He built a successful business, but that doesn't mean that he also didn't employ despicable tactics in order to win economically.
Well, he didn't do it in the ways. If he did do it,
No,
I
he
don't know
did.
what. But
He
here's the
did.
thing: I don't know historically, but I know what J.P. Morgan did, and
All of them were terrible.
well, I mean,
You know why they were.
J.P.
Hang
Morgan.
on.
I don't know how J.P.
Do you know where the term robber baron originates from? Basically,
Can I actually? Sorry to
yeah. Go ahead.
interject. I'm just curious as like what we're like what the combo is. I just want to say hi to you guys, but I also wanted to just I wanted to include myself because I find this all very interesting. I just wanted to know like a synopsis.
So a brief rundown. We were talking about, I think, automobiles, into Henry Ford, into Green Book, into racism, into Jim Crow, back into the Henry Ford.
Okay, all right,
That was the trace.
gotcha.
The thing is, Sanson, is that, like, with Henry Ford, I guess you can only work within the societal structures that exist around you. So people will like levy criticism at, like, I don't know, Ulysses S. Grant or Lincoln for having blood on their hands, or whatever. But they had
Hang
to work
on,
with the
not the same thing though. Not the same
No,
thing.
no.
So
But
we
what I'm saying is
so
that, by comparison, didn't Henry Ford, like, wasn't he a pioneer of the 5-day work week and, like, increased wages for his employees and reduced hourly shift?
So he basically made a relationship that was healthier than a lot of other businesses at the time. And that's great. I'm not condemning that. But that doesn't give him a pass on all the, like, messed up stuff and I'm also not condemning him, right? Like, my goal isn't to judge. Oh, go ahead.
This is kind of where I'm jumping in and asking and begging the question of, like, why don't we leave aside the personal judgments of a person? I don't care about Ford. I'm interested in why, at least to some degree, it seems like there was a system incentivizing him to cooperate and set up these systems that did work. Maybe to a degree they didn't, but it does seem like a new, unfounded adoption of a certain ideology and system that, to a degree, worked. The incentives both lined his pockets and made others wealthy, and the country
Logic,
wealthy.
I will give you this. Capitalism is a more effective cooperative means of labor resource distribution than landlordism or feudalism.
Okay.
But I think, this is my opinion now, that it is less effective as a means of resource allocation than socialism. Basically, where not necessarily where the government controls everything, because I don't believe that. I'm really anti-authority. So I prefer a smaller government, but where the means of production are socially owned or controlled. And that might mean socially, like through democracy. It might mean socially as in just cooperative independence. It might mean a lot of things, but
I guess we go ahead, Mel, if you have something you want to say.
No, I'm sorry. According to TikTok, I am not vroom vrooming. So I'm sorry for any background noise. I'm just outside.
Oh no, you're good. You're good.
Yeah. So excuse any background noise. But no, I wanted to say. So I am also very anti-authoritarian. Like I very am much against like the idea of like, you know, how do I explain this? So I really don't like the idea of presidents, which sounds kind of silly, but I'm just very much against like somebody having one person having all
executive
that power.
authority.
Yes, exactly. In the quotes of West, one man shouldn't have all that power. So, you know, I feel like, you know, we should also look into like as far as like American politics go. Sorry to make this all political, y'all. But as far as like American
No,
politics
please
go,
make it political. Just spill it.
okay. So as far as like American politics go, I feel like we should be like we the people should be voting in anybody in power, not the president appointing people, but we the people doing it. Because the thing is then we have things like what happened, was that last year or maybe 2 years ago with Roe versus Wade being overturned?
Yeah,
Because
where 3 of the judges were appointed by Trump.
exactly. And I feel like that is rather unfair that we did not get a sole choice in that.
So I'm also anti-authoritarian, so we can go from that angle. And from that angle, I view that as synonymous with enshrining the sovereign individual, giving each individual their degree of sovereignty, to the degree, I guess, they're not harming others, if we want to use the harm principle or something like that. Would you guys kind of agree with that?
Can you, I hate to be kind of stupid, but can you rephrase that a little bit?
Well, you're not stupid. I'm kind of going off on a tangent. The reason I said what I said is because for me, a socialist system seems to undermine a sovereign individual's will with the will of at least a governing body. Maybe not a higher up tyrant, one president. You're fine to question the president, but it's going to be some governing body. Some governing body is going to rule over and usurp the will of the sovereign individual. And from that standpoint, I think capitalism is a little bit better, because capitalism seems to put at least the sovereign individual as the axiom. It doesn't disregard the risks of that. Some individuals will screw up, but it seems like the most foundational axiom through which to then base policy and cooperation and wealth distribution off of. Things like Henry Ford, I believe, people like him could utilize this system, whether he's a greedy shithead or a really utopian, egalitarian. Doesn't really matter. What matters is the system he's in, and whether or not he can actually flourish those ideas. And I think to a degree, a lot of his good ideas were able to flourish, because at the end of the day, his bad qualities, everyone has bad qualities. So we need a system that just incentivizes the good ones. Of course, people are going to screw up and people are going to be limited in their daily life, but at least cooperate and incentivize the people who are greedy to get greedy through cooperation, not through it's just pure exploitation and things like that.
I see where you're coming from. And I guess also to kind of comment on a point that you made earlier, as far as like, like one, like basically like essentially like putting faith into like one single person, like, and we're not perfect creatures, and I understand that, not like in a religious way, just in general. We're not perfect creatures. We will make mistakes. We will make bad decisions. But that's why I feel so strongly that we should not have one single president, one single executive power. Like, yes, they have a whole, like, they have a whole group of people who kind of help them, like, make decisions, which is true. But it's the fact that like we as people don't vote those people in, number one. Number two, some of them serve life in the time that they are there. Like, for example, like in like House of Representatives and like Congress and stuff like that. And I could be using those words very wrongly, but like I'm talking about like for example, like I think it's Mitch McConnell.
Legacy politicians who've just been in politics forever.
Yes, and
Yeah.
so I think that not only should we have an age limit as far as young, but an age limit as far as old. Because there's got, like, we've seen Mitch McConnell literally have absent seizures on television. We've seen it happen. It's horrible. And like one of the oldest people in Congress is like one of the most powerful, and honestly,
I think we lost you there, Whit. I don't know if you got a call or what. We've lost you. My question would just be to everyone, sort of like, to what degree any policy is justifiable when we want to usurp the will of an individual. If we're making a policy for like industrial standards or that kind of thing within a corporation, that's a lot different than monopolizing violence and ripping someone out of their home because they've committed unaliving or something like that.
So when we talk about socialism, it doesn't simply mean collective or authoritarian usage of. Socialism is not authoritarian. So when we mean socialism, it means putting as much power into the hands of the individual, but more equitably than under something like liberalism. If that makes sense. Where it's like, yeah, you should have maximum. And so I like to tell people, like, I'm not equal outcome. I don't believe in equal outcome. I believe in equal opportunity.
Right.
Right.
So I loved everything you said there. I guess the thing I'm skeptical about is this idea of property ownership being public, and how that instills the individual's autonomy or sovereignty against you said socialism is not tyrannical or authoritarian, which I can sympathize with that, but then why this method of like wealth distribution? Because that does seem to usurp the individual. You seem to have a class of people deciding for the rest of people how wealth should be distributed, and that seems great.
Hang on, the class is everybody though. That's the point.
Okay.
There isn't one group with more power than everyone. And the way I see it is we all draw from society. Like, the natural law principle. I don't know the exact wording, but basically the idea that social contracts with society, where if without society you would be in the state of nature where it's just you and the environment and you'd have to spend all of your time surviving. But with go ahead.
I was literally about to say, like, a lot of this discussion ultimately boils down to the respective philosophical insights as to what you think the human state of nature is. Because, like, Jean-Jacques Rousseau came up with the whole idea of the social contract, right? So implicitly, by existing in society, people either explicitly or tacitly are willing to surrender some aspect of their freedom in order to have the rest of their rights maintained and for the social order to exist. But it depends on how far you think that pooling of the sovereignty of individuals should be extended. Because, if you're a Hobbesian, you think the state of nature is, what did he say it was, like brutish, short, and miserable. Whereas there are people, on the other, John Locke thought that humans were pretty much implicitly good, and you can kind of just leave them alone. And the idea of a social contract was a slippery slope towards tyranny. So it kind of depends on what your philosophical insights on what you think human nature is.
Well, I would say that's almost
yeah,
just
very
completely
good point,
disproven
man.
by like billionaires. The fact that billionaires exist is just an inherent, like, no one in their right mind that's not like completely greedy would willingly be a billionaire. There's about one billionaire I respect, Mackenzie Scott, because she's actively giving as much money as she can away, and it's the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos. So she didn't get it through illicit means, basically, the exploitation of their workforce. Like, think about how little the average Amazon employee gets paid compared to Jeff Bezos.
I'm right with you on that, but the irony
Yeah.
is a utopian system would make philanthropists
No, not
of us
utopian.
all.
Hey, I'm hang on. I'm not utopian socialist.
Oh,
So when I
I'm
say
saying I know you're not. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say you're trying to paint a
oh, okay.
utopian vision.
No, I'm not trying
I'm,
to.
I'm saying I guess I am not. I'm not usually trying to do that. I'm just saying in an ideal system, I could picture a bunch of philanthropists. Right? Like that would be
Okay,
the ideal system
hang
where
on.
when you think of
Hang
this
on, no.
idea of being a billionaire, it's like, well, if
Wait
everything
a
was
second.
equitably distributed, perhaps we would all be getting richer and richer and more affluent and things would be more abundant
Hang
to
on.
really okay.
I have a critical disagreement. So philanthropy, I think, is the worst way to assign resources. Because if you think about it, what it basically boils down to is wealthy people, not all philanthropy, right? Like personal giving is great. But when you have wealthy, like you're relying on wealthy people making considerable donations to you, we've instead of saying we're socially going to decide what is worth spending money on, we are instead going to hand that choice, that decision to a private individual who has earned their fortune through exploitation of others, directly or indirectly through the use of profit extraction of their companies. When these people are building their fortunes atop the stagnating wages of the middle class and the lower class, they should be spit upon. But they're not. They're getting away with it consistently. And it's so, the top CEOs in the country used to earn about 20 times the average wage of the employee. And it is about 250 times at this point. Not even considering the fact that they don't usually earn most of their money through direct pay, but rather stocks. Which they can,
Well, you just made my point
yeah.
for me there. You just made that final point for me. I think that
Go
it's
for it.
not well that's sort of that abundance issue and philanthropy. That's this issue of stocks, where to put the money. The fact that the more money you make, the more risk you have to manage, and the capitalist system incentivizes things like, I guess we don't have to call it philanthropy, but wealth redistribution. You have
Hang
to
on.
if you just hold your money, you are risking it, and you have to either invest it into businesses or quote unquote distribute it in a way that's.
Hang on. So here's the problem with that is passive investment, just investing in companies, is both an incredibly effective and safe way, typically, right? Under abnormal conditions, that you can lose a ton of money. But as it's pretty typically safe way is just owning stuff. And second, that allows them to accrue additional profits and increase their assets. So you have a cumulative effect where they continue to be able to get richer and richer because they have an increasing amount of assets that they can, even if it's just a constant percentage, they can increase their income.
But the
through
fact that you're saying they're getting assets and they're not holding their wealth or hoarding their wealth is an economic wealth redistribution. If they go buy a
to
Porsche,
them.
what do you mean? Someone else has
okay,
to do the. It's
hang
a
on.
consensual trade, both profit,
Hang
right?
on.
So whoever
So what I'm
sells
saying,
the thing to them also makes money.
okay, hang on. So the things they're buying that are like, first off, rich people don't really spend any more in typical like average consumer stuff. The things that would help like local businesses, what they tend to get is luxury things. So a Porsche is a great example. You know, $250,000 to a $1 million car does not benefit local communities. It benefits a single car dealership specializing in luxury vehicles. And this doesn't necessarily represent the average, like what we want it to be going to. It just
No,
goes to
because
another rich person,
but
basically.
when you say, I completely disagree with this notion, because like I shouldn't have, if we're gonna again go off the axiom of the sovereign individual, I have no judgment on how people spend their money. It's this issue of
Neither do I.
right. It's this issue of wanting a system that incentivizes greedy people to cooperate in the market and distribute their wealth. That's gonna this idea of, oh, the rich get richer has to be part of the incentive program, because otherwise they wouldn't invest their money into the program. But in doing so, the wealth redistribution is still happening. To be skeptical of profit margins, to think that a purchase on a Lamborghini isn't a suddenly leaking equity investment is spot to my point. He basically, a rich person who goes blows $500,000 on a Lambo just wasted their money theoretically, unless they have a business plan to somehow rent that out. They're not going to get the resale value the moment they drive
Hang
it
on,
off the lot.
they have so much money. They have so much money that it doesn't matter, though.
Well, that matters because
Like,
everything they're buying is like that. It's not just a Lambo. They're going and
yeah,
buying houses. They're buying
okay,
buying businesses, and they're
hang
buying
on.
real estate, right?
So
Property.
yeah, okay, but here's the problem. So this is the problem again, is those assets are going to increase their income, right? Which means they will be
Not
able to buy.
necessarily. Like with the
No,
Lambo,
yes,
with the Lambo, it didn't.
Hang on, I'm
With
not
the
talking.
Lambo,
Hang
it
on,
wouldn't.
hang on. Yeah, the Lambo it wouldn't, but something like a business or a house or a
All
stock,
risks.
those are
All risks.
yeah, no, everything's a risk, but these are
Yeah.
things that they can pretty safely just gain increased value, and like that's what landlordism is basically.
I disagree with that assumption, man. I think there's a lot
So
more risk in the market than you think.
here's my
And
take, right?
especially this is why it goes to the spiritual component, especially if they are a really greedy and short-sighted person. They're going to be more likely to
Hang
blow the
on.
money.
What makes you think greedy and short-sighted are the same thing? Some of the most greedy people are penny pinchers. Look at Margaret Thatcher, dude.
Right. If you're truly greedy, you would have a longer time preference. So, and that's what I mean about capital. Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
make that assumption though. I mean,
Well,
I would say greedy
this word
people,
greed can be
are people.
flexible.
So greedy, I would say, means willing to do anything for money.
Oh, I wouldn't say that. Okay. I wouldn't say that.
Maybe not. That's not perfect, but that would be one of the attributes of
I
somebody
would
who's
say it'd be
greedy.
more like an
Um,
unwillingness to share, even when share with others, even when you have like a stack of resources abundantly.
or there would be a high effective value, basically.
Oh, what do you mean by that? I don't understand that.
So like anytime you have resources, so let's say somebody came to you asking for food and you had a pantry full of food, you're at no
Right.
risk to get out, it's pretty easy.
Right.
There's a very high effective value because otherwise they're going to starve. And
Effective
there's
value being
effective value being their gain,
Oh,
right?
I
The
see.
amount of
Yeah,
good
yeah,
you've
yeah.
done.
Yeah, I got
So
you.
effective value is the value of whatever contribution you've made. And so since you've saved a life, that's very high effective value. And the cost to you is negligible. So somebody who's greedy, even when there's very high effective value and very low cost, would still be reluctant
right.
to part with that.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And I think what that means is you end up like Jeff Bezos, for example, is one of the like statistically greediest people in the country, where he gives the least to charitable foundations. So, and oftentimes when these guys are doing this, they're giving to charitable foundations. It's really a tax evasion scheme, dressed up as a charitable foundation. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. So like they don't have our best interests at heart. They have their own interests at heart and the interests
Well, I
of their
mean,
dynasties.
again, to give them the freedom. I mean, at that point, I'm sure they're judging the.
Why are we giving
this
them the freedom though?
No,
Like,
I mean, like
they're
they,
extracting from
because I
society.
think
We should tax them for it.
I think they should have the freedom to judge the charitable organizations. If Jeff Bezos is a really respectable business owner who follows all of the laws and practices, I don't know if he does or whatever, but let's assume he does. I would put him, and he's right, a successful businessman. He's growing all this wealth. Then for him to be skeptical of the charitable organizations and to want to just continue to invest into business growth and stuff might be a political ideology worth considering, since he's the one who's sort of ranked himself up the ladder. Perhaps he has better
Logic.
ideas of wealth distribution than
When
that.
is enough enough?
Well,
Is
like
it never
in what
enough?
sense? In what sense do you mean? But I
So
guess any
at what point?
tyranny, violence, those kinds of things are the
Hang
words
on.
that come to mind.
At what point is one person's wealth, when somebody's wealth gets to what point do you think we should go, yeah, I think that's a little too much. We're gonna tax that like 99%.
I don't think there's a limit, because I think wealth is
That's
just
that's wild to me.
well, yeah, fair enough. That's a fair scrutiny. But from my perspective, wealth seems to be tied to a level of spirituality. The people who,
No.
from my perspective, right? That's from my perspective. I feel like
What?
a person who
How
really
does what does wealth have to do with that?
well, I'm trying to explain it. I think that for a person to actually reach a level of abundance where their emotional stability is aligned with their risk management, their level of spirituality has earned them that position. If you have tons
Hang
of
on.
money, it's really easy to waste, basically. You know?
Hang on, that's not the what we see in real life. Typically, the best way to get rich is to already be rich, or to have family that's rich, or to have a very lucrative job, or get really lucky. Like, say you invested in Bitcoin early, you know. So like, the ways that you get rich typically aren't the ways of like working hard or doing good deeds
I completely
or
disagree.
being spiritually into like there. I think
Yeah, I
that
completely disagree.
hang on. Being spiritual, like being mindful, being emotionally intelligent, these things are things that will help you get wealthy because it allows you to more effectively control your actions, your behaviors. But it doesn't mean you like, I would not correlate wealth to spirituality. I don't think there's a link.
There's two things.
Carnegie, one of the most like beneficent individuals in like industrial history, didn't he like build libraries all over the country and the Peace Palace, and like I think he gave most of his personal fortune away.
Sorry, which person?
Yeah, Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I've heard of Carnegie doing some messed up stuff, but I'm not like, I don't have strong.
He was
read anything about him.
I know he was a big proponent of progressive taxation as well. So the idea that you can't be wealthy and simultaneously virtuous, I think, is a kind of a non-starter.
Well, I would say it depends largely on like where you got the wealth. First off, your willingness to give it up. Second off, what else?
Well,
Honestly,
the market,
those are
right?
the
The
two
market
most
is
important things.
competing. Well, the other part that you're neglecting is the market. The market's competing for that money
Like,
at all times. The real estate agent's trying to rip the rich person off. The nanny, they're trying to up their hourly salary. The chef, everyone sees how rich this person is, and at every moment they're trying to gut them for as much as they can get out of the rich person. So they're constantly having to risk they're constantly having to balance their own wealth as well, like, and not get ripped off. You're underlying, like, my point about that is, if you're managing money poorly and you're rich, you will lose it very fast. You have this image of like spoiled inheritance, people who just get rich. They don't stay rich. The market's way too competitive.
Hang on.
Right? They'll get talked into some high interest deal and high property tax, and the real estate walk around licking their lips.
Hang on, stop. So really, it's really their parents basically can afford to teach them the tricks, right? Of like, get a really good education,
assumption.
which we see.
Huge assumption.
No. Look at the wealthy and where they send their kids to school. Really expensive private schools.
I've been there, buddy. I've been there.
Right. So what I'm saying is like they can afford to give their kids very good educations. That doesn't mean the kids will be very intelligent, because that would be an assumption of their effect. Like, I can't make that assumption one way or the other. But it is a measure of like, they're not just going to get scammed. Like, some of them will, like, sure, but to assume that most of them will, or that it's like really hard to maintain a fortune, is ridiculous. It's not hard to maintain wealth if you simply don't spend it, and if you're investing it into smart, like, you can effectively get a pretty sizable return. Like, I'm not sure, it depends on your ability, but like 4 to 12% annually return on your money. Some of them will be more risky than others. Some of them will be safer than others. But it's not hard. Like I certainly wouldn't say that.
That really makes
You
me
might
laugh.
have to
Phantom.
get
Have you heard that?
lucky, but
Have you heard that Louis C.K. bit on that, Phantom? It really makes me laugh. Where he's like, if
no,
you're
I
really
haven't.
rich, if you're really rich, the bank calls you up and gives you more money. But if you're broke,
Oh
the
yeah, I've heard
bank
that one.
you're like, well, we're going to charge you because you don't have any money in your account. You're overdrawn. It's like
Dude,
he
I
goes to
hate
the
poor taxes so much.
he goes to the supermarket and is like, would you like a free sample? And he's like, no, I'm overdrawn. I have to raise $5 to be broke in order to get a free sample. Yeah, but
Love it. Love
yeah.
it.
Do you, Phantom? What do you think? Do you support presumably you're a supporter of inheritance tax, but like, what percent? What's the appropriate percent of inheritance taxation?
Honestly, this is the difficult thing. I don't think inheritance tax is the most effective way to do it. There's a lot of ways around it. So I I'm fine with an inheritance tax. I think that like past a certain point, you should be paying inheritance tax. So let's take anything over $20 million in assets, let's say. I would say is when we start to heavily tax. Once you get up to like $1 billion in assets, if for some reason your parent has that much, right? I think we should be doing 90% of what you are inheriting. Because at the
What?
point where like at the
Oh my
point where you're
God.
that wealth, I'm saying anything over $1 billion, right? Because at
The
the point where
problem
you're
with
that
this,
wealthy,
man,
hang on,
you,
hang on, hang on,
okay,
hang on, hang on,
okay.
hang on. At the point where you're that wealthy and you're waiting until your death to actually spend it and use it for something productive to society, I think that should go back to the society, to the government, so that we can do more public works.
I just don't get the assumption that the government's going to manage the money better. If this person's managed to grow their
Yeah,
wealth, why would you
yeah, I
distribute
kind
it
of
to
agree with
people
that.
who can't manage it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Also,
the money.
generally, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say the money that these millionaires accrue, like if someone starts a farm machinery business, and the positive externality of them amassing wealth is that millions of people are getting lower prices on grain, and they've amassed a personal fortune. I would say that it's probably appropriate that they should be able to hand off a sizable fortune to their family, especially if that business is going to continue. But moreover, I think Thought Experiment already mentioned it, like saving and investment are kind of two sides of the same coin. So that money isn't being put in a mattress, it's being put in a bank, and the time preference on that money lowers the capacity for it to be borrowed at rates that are advantageous for future investment. So
Right,
it
but
is being used, even if not for public works. I agree with Logic in that I don't necessarily think that the government is going to more appropriately use that money than a private investor would. It depends.
so here's again the issue about private investment, and I'm not saying there should be no investment. Like potentially, but I think investment can be good. The problem is it's generally a measure taken by the wealthy to build and increase their fortunes. And I think when they're doing that, what it is actually doing is redirecting money away from middle class and lower class actors into their own pockets. So I don't think that they should be building staggering dragon horde fortunes. I think past a certain point, we should say, okay, you've gotten enough, right? You're allowed to be wealthy, but at the point where you can afford basically anything you fucking want and still be completely fine at any point in your life as long as you don't blow $1 billion somehow. I think we say, you have enough now.
But what they have isn't just wealth. What they have is political control on many councils and like they're on boards and councils of businesses and industries. That's what gives them the wealth. If they're a huge shareholder in an industry, they're around the table making decisions within that
Hang
industry.
on.
To strip them
So,
of that wealth would be to strip them of their judicial power within the
okay,
industry.
hang on. So you're describing the problem of basically the way politics and economics engage each other. And I know you're not talking about like the government. You're talking about the politics of companies. And these are just ways that they can increase their power in each category. But that's not going to mean necessarily good for everyone else or for us. It will mean good for them because then they can use their political power to gain increased economic wealth, and they can use their wealth to increase their political power. It's kind of a
But
vicious
system where they just
Okay,
build
but
these, insane. Yeah, go ahead.
but the public corporation, right? Anyone can buy a share and hold stock in, and the investors aren't just, although there's a majority share like upper shareholders, right, who control maybe the majority of stocks. There's still this other minority of people that can liquidate in the market. So you're discounting the economics of capitalism in the sense that what I said earlier, the axiom of individual sovereignty is the one we have to operate from. People are self-interested and people are greedy. So to try and
So
judge them about that and say, oh, they should spend their money differently or they're not spending their wealth as I would, that doesn't give, that presupposes that there's some way to regulate our way out of the sovereign individual. We don't need a system to dismantle greed across the board. What we need is a system that incentivizes people who are greedy, who are usually corrupt, who are usually only profit driven, to cooperate in the market so that even though they're profit driven and just greedy, other people are still benefiting from that. And that's what you see in these systems, that when you say like a public corporation is just to line their pockets, you're talking about a public entity. It's not Jeff Bezos holds stock in Amazon, right?
yeah, he holds like majority stock, right?
Right. So the reason he's so rich has nothing to do with, it has to do with his power around the table of Amazon and how he control. If he were
Right.
to change
Hang on. It's
right?
been hang on. It's been how little of his wealth he's been willing to share with anyone in his company. If he has a majority share, right? That's basically means
He doesn't. He doesn't have more
hasn't.
than 51%.
Does he not?
No, I
Does he
think
have
that's
like
illegal. I
40%?
think it's illegal for a corporation to have one
Oh,
shareholder
so
as the
he's
majority.
not doing the illegal amount, but I imagine he's close to the legal amount.
Well, what's
And that's
interesting
basic.
is
Hang on.
you see big disruptions when he sells off huge amount of stock. Same with Tesla, right? Like, yes, Elon
Bezos
Musk
has
holds
9%.
Tesla stock, but you can see a huge
Wait, he
disruption.
has
If
90%.
Nine. I just looked it up. 9%.
9%. He only has
There you go.
9%, and he has
There
that
you
much
go,
money.
man. That's what
Good
I'm trying to
God.
say. That's a point of how much the wealth distribution is true, bro. How there's billions of dollars that's not his that are operating through
Hang
Amazon
on,
that
but
other people hold.
you
He only
realize,
holds
hang on,
9%, bro.
Logic, here's the issue though. Here's the issue is that most of the money is owned by rich people. Therefore, most of those are probably owned by rich people. Poor people don't have the money to invest in Amazon or Google or like,
And Amazon
sure,
stock's like
maybe they'll,
$100.
hang on, stop. So you're talking, okay, here's the problem though, right? If you have $100, but then a rich person has $1 billion or okay, let's say $100,000 versus your $100, they can still buy 1,000 to your one, right?
Yes.
So the issue is the power differential. You can't compete. And so the goal should be to put people on as level a playing field as possible without infringing on their rights to, like, basically anything, property included. So like I don't believe that everybody needs to have the same exact outcome, but basically people should have more opportunity, like the individual should have more opportunity to invest in the market, but all of us, rather than simply the guys who have been exploiting their companies for.
I agree with you. I
don't know.
think the biggest part's like financial literacy and risk management, though. I don't think it's wealth redistribution. People have the extra $100, they just don't know where to put it. They think putting it in their
That's
savings
not
account.
true. That's
I
not
do think
true.
that.
I think the
$100
biggest
isn't going to make a dent in their like, it's going to help maybe, but it's not going to change their entire fortunes.
It could,
think-
right? There's a lot of potential in any kind of investment. If you know how to flip $100, you know how to flip
Dude,
1,000.
something like 70% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. That means they don't have the money to invest.
Yeah, but
$100
how many people are operating under the market, black market, and totally wealthy because they're just either dealing drugs or doing whatever, right? And
Not very
there's
many.
there's a good amount. My point is they're hustling. Same with people flipping stuff on Craigslist, small business owners. Like there are people hustling and flipping dollars out there. If you don't think there's people,
Hang on, they're hustling because they have to,
yes,
because they're not earning enough money
Yeah.
to make ends meet.
hustling is good. Or wait, Wait, that's what I'm talking about,
I
incentives. If you didn't have the incentive to hustle, then where would our cooperative systems come from? We would all be
from
greedy and self-interested.
hang on, no, that's not true. Why are you assuming we'd be greedy and self-interest?
Without
So
incentive to
here's
cooperate,
hang
why
on,
would
hang
I?
on.
If I'm on an
Hang on.
island with
Here's the
you and I
difference
have no
is
incentive to cooperate, why would I?
okay. Hang on. So the primary difference is I don't want to incentivize greed. I don't want greed to reward you. I want when you use greed, I think you should be punished or disincentivized from using greed. This doesn't mean
Right.
like no greed at all is allowed, but at a certain point, we should be able to go, yeah, we think that's too much greed. At that point of greed, you deserve a civic fine. I don't think that's absurd.
I think the biggest problem. Well, I don't know about Canada, but I know in America our biggest problem, and when we're talking about individual assets and individuality and stuff like that, I think our biggest problem here in the States is the lack of meritocracy rather than social connections. Uh, and I hate to bring J.P. Morgan up all the time because I really hate J.P. Morgan, what he's done in this country. But if we were to take what our Constitution represents, law number 3 states that everyone has the right to keep their money, whether it be gift, trade, work, whatever, as long as it doesn't go against law number 2 and law number 1. And we look back at J.P. Morgan and how he took Western Electric from Westinghouse and just took it from them and said, and basically he lost the bid for electricity. He had all this power and he knew people in like court systems and higher ups and stuff like that. And he just took his company from him and turned it into General Electric. Like that takes away the third law within our Constitution that was not upheld based upon who someone is rather than the merit-based system that he used to win the bid originally. And I think that is the biggest problem that we have in America today. We're not holding people accountable based upon what our rules are doctrined by when it comes to capitalism.
Yeah, I kind of tread the line between what Logic and Phantom are saying here, in that I guess like being a European, I feel a tremendous pull from the idea of like Gladstonian liberalism, but I've seen the advantageous things that Fabianism has done for European society. And for the same reason, I hesitate to feel a little bit squeamish about the fact that there are deliberately self-interested and greedy people involved in corporations. For the exact same reason, I don't trust government to be, because they're just people as well. They have the exact same moral foibles.
Yes.
So, but the thing is that the reason why.
Hang on, Evolve. Socialism doesn't need government, though.
No. I agree. The reason.
Okay.
Let me just land. The reason why I feel squeamish, Phantom, about the mass hoarding of wealth is not for some principle of like I think greed is bad or whatever, but I think practically it has real consequences for our political institutions. I think extreme wealth concentration undermines democratic institutions. It can limit government's ability to invest in public goods. It can endanger meritocratic promises just generally. So it's like kind of what Logic said there, where like we could do like inheritance tax could potentially strip people of their capacity to engage politically with their wealth, but that doesn't necessarily mean that engaging with their wealth politically is a good thing. It's we can see how the insidious effect that wealth is having on political institutions. So that's the main reason why I worry about confiscation of wealth, is that it can subvert our political institutions pretty fundamentally.
But you can understand it because y'all had the Rothschild, right? Y'all had Rothschilds. No, Rothschilds and J.P. Morgan are very similar in many aspects, right? And I brought that up in an American debate. You know what somebody told me? They said, "Oh, you can't talk about that because they're both Jewish, right?" And here they told me that. And here's the thing that tripped me out based upon what they know: Rothschilds are not Jewish. Their original name was Bauer. they changed their name. Their business was Rothschild. Then they wanted.
Every
Oh, we
time.
got TK. But yeah, that's the reason why, Phantom, I agree with you in that, like, yeah, this extreme wealth concentration is just by for the same reason I'm worried, feel a necessity for the social contract is like the idea that this mass hoarding of wealth, as we've seen, is like really damaging to like our political institutions, just by virtue of the fact that government is made up of people that are prepared to surrender their own principles for the sake of amassing their personal fortunes as well. There's so much to buy politically if you have a lot of money.
And Evolved, it's interesting. You were talking about centralization of power in government, and I agree 100%. Which is why I think the best way to do this is to, like, for example, you can have positions of power within a government, but you need to hold it maximally responsible to individuals within the society. Like, I honestly was agreeing with what Mel was saying earlier, like, all positions should be, like, elected by the people. Like, we should have the ability to vote somebody out at any time if we decide to. I think that'd be great.
So so do you believe in constitutionalism in government, or are you like a pure Democrat? What do you think about that sort of stuff?
What do you mean constitutionalism in government?
Well, obviously, when we frame a constitution for a state, we limit the powers of the three branches of government specifically so they can only operate within particular parameters. And then changing the constitution is a difficult and arduous process legalistically. But if we were just going to have a purely democratic society, we could change the will of how the government operates overnight. But I think then we get onto the territory of it's two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. You know what I mean? Like pure democracy.
I think honestly, constitution should be more resistant to change than like laws or politicians. Where like I think laws should have to respect what the Constitution says. And we can change the Constitution. It should just be very difficult.
Yeah, well, you also need a good constitution, which is the other thing. You can have a bad constitution.
The Bill of Rights aren't terrible. There's some things in it that are just too confusing. Like, I think the right to form a militia oftentimes is conflated for just simply the right to bear arms, which...
Yeah, like, okay, like, I don't mind a monopoly on violence, but it seems integral that being able to, like, fork different, like, for instance, having a differentiation between the state and the municipal and the federal government, those differentiations seem important, like, not giving, decentralizing some
Basically,
of the decisions.
Give some of the military power to the municipal and state governments, and this kind of result, like those would be the militia effectively, right? And so then you can restrict the right to own weapons, maybe not entirely, right? Maybe allow certain weapons, hunting rifles,
exactly, within a certain context.
Right, within certain contexts, but disallow things like shotgun. Well, shotguns are kind of asterisk. But assault rifles, basically, anything that can fire like under a quarter of a second, basically half a second.
Or like, or I'm sorry,
I guess that kind of describes a handgun too. But yeah.
The thing is like a banking protocol. Like, let's say a fiscal, like a big. One of the most contentious arguments really are fiscal policies. How are we going to govern our banking policies, our lending rates, and be judicial over what is being lent out and what's being paid back, those kinds of policies, right? And it really allowing states and municipalities to like experiment within certain limitations of risk on those policies so that we can have consensual policies start to form. Ideally, the policies that are like transcendent, like the more long-standing policies, should be the more consensual policies, ones that are like built from the bottom up, similar to the Constitution, rather than this like top-down approach where we're trying to like theorize about how to stimulate a market or quantitative ease or tax a certain class, those kinds of things. We should allow, like, for instance, the different competing billionaires, to try and implement their own policy and see where it goes in the economic sense. Like some will fail, some will be better than others. That's really our only option as well. Is like, right? That is what's just going to happen. We have all these competing. Like when we think about an elite class, like they're all competing amongst each other for their own interests still. So because again, they're so greedy, right, and so self-interested. Like to think they're all cooperative is I think that's a fallacy. I think they probably all.
Hang on. Have you ever heard of the light bulb cartel?
Yeah. I think we talked about this.
So
before.
this is an example. So basically, what it amounts to is they will unite if it is in their interest to do so. Basically, if it earns them more money to do so, they will come together and say, okay, if we make sure nobody innovates in this field, we will earn more money, so let's do that. Or in the modern United States, basically what Comcast and what is it? I think the other cable company basically split America up into two halves and gave each other a monopoly in each half. So that's an example of like a duopoly. And it's really harmful because it means they can set whatever rate they want. They don't have to respect anyone. And if anyone starts to rise up in one of their territories, they can drive them out of business.
So I'm looking up light bulb cartel. Not heard of that before. Reading
Oh
it
my
up.
gosh! So basically what it was these light bulbs were getting too efficient, so people weren't buying light bulbs as much, and so they formed a cartel and limited the amount of like there were only so many hours your light bulb could burn for, and if you violated these restrictions, they would work together to drive you out of business. It's despicable. It's despicable.
It says that the after the cartel was dissolved, the bulb that was standardized by them remained in circulation. What the fuck? I'm reading more about this.
Yeah, for real, dude.
Now they just control the regulatory body that like distributes light bulbs. Like, I'm enjoying this conversation so much, y'all, but I have to go here. I have to go get to work.
No worries.
Multitask. Thank you so much for the conversation. I gave everyone a follow.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I'll
definitely
appreciate it. But yeah, see you, bro.
Peace.